Well, good evening. I'm hearing laughter, so that's a good thing.
That's the staff.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Tuesday, February 24th, 2009 meeting of the Glendale City Council.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Kasakian, could you call the roll, please?
Council members Najarian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Yusefian. Mayor Draymond.
Here. And tonight we have something very special. Our flag salute, which was to be led by Councilmember Quintero. Instead, we have visitors, and some special visitors. And I would like to turn to my colleague, Councilmember Najarian, and ask him to introduce them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my pleasure to again welcome Scoutmaster Harriet Hammonds from the Troop 317 charter by the Holy Redeemer Church and School 2, I believe, correct? I know Holy Redeemer, a very fine school. And we couldn't keep them away from their civic involvement, and we're proud to have them here. And Harriet, the Scoutmaster, if you could ask the boys to introduce themselves and then lead us
I will.
in the pledge.
And I'm actually the Merit Badge Counselor for Citizenship in the Community, and their Scoutmasters are here also. But okay. I'm very proud. I am an Assistant Scoutmaster for another troop. We won't talk about other troops tonight. Okay, we'll have them come up and introduce themselves and tell them your rank.
My name is Kenny Senstad, and I am a second-class scout.
Thank you, Kenny.
I'm Carter D. Haven, and I'm a first-class scout.
Right, Gordon.
I'm Brett Shaler, and I'm a second-class scout.
Thank you, Brett.
I'm Daniel Zamora, and I'm a Star Scout.
Thank you, Daniel.
I'm Mike Misitich, and I'm a second-class scout.
Hey, Mike.
I'm Liam Kashali, and I'm a tenderfoot.
Did you say your name again for us?
Liam Kashali.
Yeah.
I'm William Shaler, and I'm a Life Scout.
Okay, William.
And Kenny will lead us on the flag salute.
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for this evening's invocation as delivered by Reverend Skip Lindman, Pastor, Congregational Church of La Cañada.
Let us pray. Under your law we live, O God, and by your will we govern ourselves. Help us as good citizens to respect neighbors whose views differ from ours, so that without partisan anger we may work out issues that divide us and serve the welfare of mankind in freedom. O God, you have plans for us and power to make them happen. Give legislators, executives, and government workers a knowledge of your will for the world. Let them remember that they serve a public trust beyond personal gain or glory. May they see that no nation or city lives for itself alone, but is responsible to you for peace and for the well-being of all your children. And thank you, Lord, for letting us be faithful public servants. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Lindeman.
Can I just
Good to see you again.
Can I make one comment? Thank you for having us this evening, and we don't stay the whole meeting because they have a troop, but they have a requirement for a little bit to be here. And I'm leaving some invitations to our Boy Scout Big Stock auction on April 4th for all of you. And there's also the Montrose is having their annual installation dinner on a week from Tuesday, second Tuesday, I believe that's the 10th of March. You're all invited. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for helping us with our Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Thank you. Mr. City Clerk, can we hear your report, please?
The agenda for the February 24, 2009 regular meeting of the Glendale City Council was posted on Thursday, February 19, 2009 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Okay, thank you very much. And our next item?
Under presentation and appointments, that's 3A is the agenda preview for the meeting of March 3rd, 2009.
And with that, let's go to Bob McFall, our Assistant City Manager.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Next week, March 3rd, there won't be a specific housing authority or redevelopment agency meeting, but there will be a joint city council and Glendale redevelopment agency meeting at 2:30, where these two bodies will entertain a request from Luna Playhouses, a request for city funds for continued operation costs. On the Glendale City Council that evening at 6 o'clock, there's 4 action items to consider. The first, the fire chief with an agreement from the Glendale Adventist Medical Center to provide professional emergency medical service support to the Glendale Fire Department, in particular paramedic program. Secondly, the police chief and fire chief making a joint report regarding the Los Angeles Regional Interoperability Communication Systems, JPA agreement. Next, the Director of Administrative Services will be submitting the mid-year second quarter financial status report. And then lastly, the Director of Planning with the report regarding the potential for combining design review with subdivision applications. And that would be all.
Thank you, Mr. McFall. Mr. Kasakian, our next item.
Next item at B is a proclamation designating March 2009 as Cesar Chavez Month.
Thank you, and I'd like to ask Councilmember Quintero if he would make that presentation.
Is there a committee here to...
The representative that is receiving this?
No?
That being the case, Mr.
Well,
Quintero, you're flying solo.
I'll read it out and present it to the committee at a later date. The proclamation reads, whereas Cesar Chavez, founder and president of the United Farm Workers of America, was born on March 31st, 1927, passed away at the age of 66 on April 22nd, 1993. Cesar Chavez joined the U.S. Navy in 1945 and served in the Western Pacific during the Second World War. Cesar Chavez inspired an entire generation of Americans to participate in social and civic affairs and motivated many to answer the call to public service. Cesar Chavez dedicated his life to the improvement of farm workers' employment and living conditions, and his struggles for the cause raised the social consciousness of the American labor movement. Cesar Chavez was one of this nation's most dynamic and effective spokesperson in the environmental and consumer movement against the heavy application of dangerous pesticides on food products. The commitment of Cesar Chavez to nonviolence and advocating change was consistent with the principles of a democratic society and serves as a heroic role model for others to follow. And therefore, John Draymond, Mayor of the City of Glendale, proclaims the month of March as Cesar Chavez Month. And in fact, there will be a celebration in his honor at Pacific Edison School. And I wish I knew the date because I would let everyone everyone know. But it's towards the end of March, and it is on a Saturday, I believe. But
we'll get you the date before the meeting ends, so you can announce it.
Or that's true. I can announce it at this meeting and the following meeting. So this will go to the Cesar Chavez Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Quintero. Our next proclamation is for Registered Dietitian Day. And I'd like to ask Jennifer Jennings, Joyce Nakashima, and Sharon Duffy, who's the president of the California Dietetic Association, to come forward. That's the Los Angeles district. And Mr. Weaver, that is your proclamation.
Thank you. I'll read the proclamation first. Whereas registered dietitians are the food and nutrition experts who can translate the science of nutrition into practical solutions for healthy living, and whereas registered dietitians have degrees in nutrition, dietetics, public health, or a related field with well-respected accredited colleges and universities, completed an internship and passed an examination, and whereas registered dietitians use their nutrition expertise to help individuals make unique, positive lifestyle changes, and whereas registered dietitians work throughout the community in hospitals, schools, public health clinics, nursing homes, fitness centers, food management, food industry, universities, research, and private practice, and whereas registered dietitians are advocates for advancing the nutritional status of Americans and people around the world, now therefore I Therefore, John Draymond, Mayor of the City of Glendale, proclaims March 11, 2009 as Registered Dietitian Day and encourage all citizens to recognize the contributions of registered dietitians and express appreciation for the commitment to promoting science-based nutrition in the hope of achieving optimum health for both today and tomorrow. Now you can get up my seat. Take my seat. And have it all evening.
Got an empty one.
Congratulations. I do know that every day when I'm listening to CNN, they come up with new studies on what you should or shouldn't eat or drink. Getting confused. So perhaps
hopefully we'll try to help.
in the future will help.
Listen to the ones from registered dietitians.
Would you like to say a few words?
Just real quick, I'm Jennifer Janenz. I'm a registered dietitian, and this is Joyce Nakashima. We're both part of the Los Angeles District of the California Dietetic Association, and we would just want to thank the City of Glendale for this proclamation. It's an honor for us to have this, and we just wanted to let you know that March is actually National Nutrition Month. So the theme for this month is to eat healthy, so we hope you all do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the work you do. And our next is a commendation to Hope Worldwide and the Los Angeles Church of Christ Central Region, and Councilmember Najarian will make that presentation. And if Rick Mark is here, there he is. If you could come forward, that would be great.
Mayor Draymond and members of council, as Alexis de Tocqueville observed more than 170 years ago, a defining characteristic of the American people is their commitment to service. Today, this ethic remains strong as across our nation, Americans of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities are donating their time and talents in an effort to improve their communities and to serve a purpose greater than themselves. Hope Worldwide is an international charity that changes lives by harnessing the compassion and commitment of volunteers to deliver sustainable, high-impact, community-based services to the poor and the needy. Their volunteer base consists of members of the Los Angeles Church of Christ, many of which live in the Glendale, Burbank, and Pasadena area. Hope Worldwide and its volunteers contacted Neighborhood Services in the fall of 2008 in search of a community service project. Our city's code enforcement staff identified 4 properties with existing code enforcement cases for assistance through the Committee for a Clean and Beautiful Glendale's Helping Hands program. Due to health and financial hardship, the elderly owners of these properties were unable to make the necessary repairs to their homes in order to bring them into compliance. Upon learning of these circumstances of each individual case, Hope Worldwide stepped up. Working in conjunction with Neighborhood Services staff, volunteers raised funds and secured in-kind donations from several local businesses. Donations included paint, irrigation supplies, stone pavers, and tools which were all used to enhance the properties. Volunteers also spent countless hours in the weeks and months leading up to the event, assessing the work needed at each property and coming up with viable work plans. Professional painters and landscapers donated their time and expertise during the planning process and, more importantly, on the actual day of the event. On January 17, 2009, over 300 volunteers joined Neighborhood Services staff and the Committee for a Clean and Beautiful Glendale in making the necessary repairs to the properties, the results which have been shown on your screens. It is with great pleasure that I now present Rick Mark, representing Hope Worldwide, and Marcel and Karina Hall, representing the Los Angeles Church of Christ Central Region, so they may receive a mayor's commendation for their contribution to improving the quality of life for 4 residents of our community.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mark, please.
Well, Dr. King once said that everybody can make a difference because everybody can serve. The Glendale area is a wonderful part of our city, and we're excited that we were able to come here and take our people who live in this community and make a difference here. This has been a great project. I know it's been great for them, but it's been great for us. Hope Worldwide, on that same day, had over 20,000 people doing acts of service throughout the United States, and this was just, we were glad to have a small part in this.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the work you do. Councilmember Najarian, I know you have the commendation with you.
Thank you, Mayor Draymond. I do have your commendation. It is presented to Hope Worldwide and Los Angeles Church of Christ Central Region in recognition of your outstanding participation in the Committee for a Clean and Beautiful Glendale's Helping Hands Day of Community Service, and for freely giving your time and energy to help 4 deserving Glendale citizens comply with city codes and restore the curbside appeal of their homes. Signed, Mayor John Draymond.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And then last but certainly not least, let me ask Captain Rio Ray to come forward. I think he has a presentation, and he is captain of our local Salvation Army.
Thank you guys for having me here tonight. You know, as I'm sure you've all noticed, the economy has not been fantastic as of late. And the Salvation Army has been bombarded by more and more people in need of our services. So this Christmas, we decided to try something new, a kettle kickoff before our actual red buckets went out in front of the stores. And we looked for people who were willing to take these buckets around and harass their friends and colleagues to give money to the Salvation Army. Ara Najarian was willing to do that for us. And Ara, we want to thank you from the Salvation Army, but also from the men, the women, and the children that would be hungry without the services of the Salvation Army. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you for harassing your friends. And thank you all for giving to make the Salvation Army a success. We have a small award for you. Overall, out of the whole campaign for the kettle kickoff, you came in 3rd place overall.
Well, that's good. Out of 3, how many?
Don't ask questions. No. We had 7 participants altogether.
Okay, good.
And I know you were competing against Chuck Sandbar. He did beat you, I'm afraid. But next year, year it's yours. So thank you so much. It's a small award.
And thank you to everyone in the city. We had the little kettle in front of the city management services desk, and before you could speak to anyone back there, you had to put some money in the kettle. So we'll do better next year. Thank you, Rio, for all your good work.
It's a small award, but it's on our budget, and thank you so much for all the resources you raised for the Salvation Army.
Thank you for all you do for our city, too, and its residents. Thank you, Captain Ray. All right. Mr. Kasakian, our next item is?
Actually, let me...
this is related to... I'm sorry. Councilmember Quintero.
I do have the date for the commemoration event. It's March the 28th. At the Pacific Edison Community Center outside in the gymnasium in and out. The event is free and the public is encouraged to attend. There'll be a salsa orchestra that was there last year, a very good orchestra actually. They performed at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, the Palladium, the Conga Room, and in addition there'll be students from local schools that'll be performing. There'll be children activities and games, and free carne asada, free chopped steak and chicken and tacos, and we'll provide that free lunch until supplies last. So get there early. 1 o'clock on March the 28th at Pacific Edison School.
Thank you, Councilmember Quintero. All right. Our next item, please.
Next is City Council and staff comments.
All right. Mr. Weaver.
I got 3 for a change.
Okay.
When I want to be reassured that the parking lot behind Damon's and Porto's, the hours are going to be looked at for adjustment since we only put one new meter in there, and that we probably won't have any more until next year. At least that's the rumors I'm hearing. People going to the theater, for instance, with the 3-hour time limit are getting caught having to run that intermission. And I heard some talk about making it a 4-hour so they could put meters in, put the money in before they go into the theater. I think some accommodation ought to be made on that particular lot. We were told that was going to be the next lot. All the new meters are going in.
Well,
Now, I don't know what the timeline is.
This
but
is an item that we have requested to be placed on the agenda and will be.
I just want to make sure.
And you can bet
that
your
one
bottom
lot.
dollar that you'll have some support, Mr. Weaver.
Yes, as they indicate, we are bringing it back as requested by council, and these items will all be.
You know when that might be coming?
The directive was ASAP, as soon as we possibly can, Mr. Weaver.
Second is campaign signs. I'm not running, so feel free. I can say what I want about them. I am just so surprised at how many people running for council don't know how to follow the rules. I've seen signs that are measuring like 4 by 8 that are supported by 4 by 4 timber, sunk in concrete into the ground illegally. I know a lot of that's being removed, and I see a lot of signs in the public rights-of-way, on the freeway on and off ramps, and I'd like some assurance that these so-called candidates are being told where they can put a sign that is legal and not illegal. I know we've all been told in the past, and I don't understand why they don't get it. And when we are removing them, which I hope is in a quick fashion, that we're assessing them the cost of the removal. Shouldn't be upon us to go in and pull out posts that are sunk into concrete. Never heard of such a thing. I'm seeing those same kind of signs on apartment buildings, whatever. I've been calling them in, and I'm encouraging anybody to see any signs illegally posted to call 548-3700 and tell them where they are. And the crew will come out and remove them. But I guess a lot of the candidates just don't get it. And the third thing, in the interest of transparency in city government, which we hear quite often, as you know, in the past, Reverend Milano sued me. The city had to defend me in that case. And he also sued the city of Glendale on the downtown specific plan, which was put into effect some time ago. He lost in the court system. He appealed. The rendering came down 2 days ago now. Unanimous verdict against Mr. Milano. The city won. We're subject to recovery of court costs. I would hope that when you all see Mr. Milano on the streets, since he does not live in Glendale, lives in Tahunga, when you do see him, please thank him for costing you, the taxpayers, somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000 to defend that lawsuit, all because he thought he was right and everybody else was wrong. $600,000 to $700,000. Think what use that money could have been put to, instead of giving it to attorneys. That's. I know. I looked at Mr. Najarian, and I'm looking at there's too many attorneys around here. But it's just unfair when people think that they're the only ones that know, and then choose to do that to us when what we're trying to do is best serve the community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Quintero.
I want to talk about a family of Good Samaritans and an unknown young woman. I didn't get her name, but coming down from my home at night, all of a sudden I see on a sort of twisty road, I see a Land Rover with its emergency lights on. Turns out to be a gentleman named Arson who owns a Renaissance restaurant and banquet hall. And fully dressed with his wife, he was trying to rescue a little bunny, a black and white bunny that was just laying on the side of the road. He didn't run over him. So anyway, I recognized him. I stopped, and then a young woman came and by this time the bunny actually got excited and tried to run away. So we spent a good 10 to I don't know how long trying to rescue the bunny, and we did. We actually got the bunny, and the young lady, I told her about the Pasadena handling our services. But anyway, hopefully that bunny was returned to their owners. But I just the idea that this gentleman, who obviously had somewhere to go, and he had the time to stop and try to rescue this little bunny. So it made me feel good about. I was directing the whole operation, of course. But anyway, we managed to trap the bunny, and had he not stopped, I don't know if I'd have noticed the bunny or not. But at any rate, it makes you feel good about people, and especially a successful business person like he is.
And you know, Mr. Quintero, it's so funny because I was just in that restaurant. In fact, their special last night was rabbit stew, actually.
So much for you, Mr. Quintero.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Quintero. I will take the punishment for making that comment. Anyway, well, thank you for being so good to our wildlife. Councilmember Najarian.
Thank you. I have some good news for the city. It's prospective good news. Hopefully it will become final good news on Thursday. But to put it in a nutshell, the President, as you know, has proposed his Economic Recovery and Reinvestment Act. This is the stimulus plan. Part of his apportionment was for L.A. County highways. That amount was $436 million. Now, usually that money goes straight through the MTA, and many times it is swallowed up in the black hole of all the projects that they have there, from subways to railways to other types of items. Upon encouragement by the city managers of the 4 neighboring cities of Pasadena, Burbank, Glendale, and La Cañada, and our own staff, John O'Bagdanian, who's on the Technical Advisory Committee, and Steve Zern, I have a motion that's going to the MTA for Thursday, and this is going to instruct the MTA to distribute to the cities of the region $316 million of that 436. 120 of it is carved out for the 405 freeway and for the 5 freeway near the 118. So there's $316 million coming, distributed to the cities on a per capita basis. That means Glendale is in line for $6 million plus. And I'm pretty confident that we have the votes for this to pass. So hopefully we'll have some good news on Thursday, and we'll have a great boost to all the projects that Steve Zern had listed. And this money is available for repaving, for light synchronization, for buses, and for any sort of improvements on our major arterials. So thank you for all your help. Thank you, city managers, for your effort and your push, and hopefully we can get it across the goal line on Thursday for the city of Glendale.
Very good, and thank you, Councilmember Najarian. That is good news indeed. I have 2 quick announcements. One is that for those of you who would like to attend the 2009 Annual Installation and Community Awards Dinner for the Montrose Verdugo City Chamber of Commerce, that is Tuesday, March the 10th, 2009, being held at the La Cañada Flint Ridge Country Club up on Godby Drive in La Cañada. And it begins at 5:30, and the program actually begins at 6:30. And if you would like to participate, you can contact the Montrose Verdugo City Chamber at area code 818-249-7171. It's a great event. I've been a number of times, and it is a terrific evening, a lot of fun, a lot of good community spirit, and it's a great way to spend an evening. So I would recommend that you do that. And while we're on the subject of Montrose, it gives me pleasure to announce that the rescheduled Montrose Founders Day, the 96th birthday of the founding, or anniversary, I should say, of the founding of the town of Montrose, Glendale's first official suburb, It's taking place this Sunday, March the 1st, and that is in the 2200 block of Honolulu Avenue in the Montrose Shopping Park, the original first developed block of commerce there in Montrose. And that is from 9 a.m. till 2 p.m. with the awards presentations and dignitaries and introduction of candidates and so on from 12:30 to 1:30. And there are all kinds of events, including food and games and rides, and as well as the certified farmers market, the thieves market, which includes antiques and collectibles, memorabilia and crafts, as well as petting zoo and all the other things you would expect from a small town Founders Day. So I encourage you to attend this Sunday. And those are my two announcements. Mr. Kasakian, our next item, please.
Next item is consent items, including minutes. The following are routine and may be acted upon by one motion. Any member of council or the audience requesting separate consideration may do so by making such request before a motion is proposed.
Okay, I have no cards requesting that we pull any of these items. Do my colleagues have any? Mr. Weaver.
Move the consent calendar at 5.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Kasakian, if you could call the roll.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian? Mayor Draymond?
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Kasakian, the next item, please.
Next item is oral communication, and I'll let you tell us what the
Okay, ladies
procedure
and
is.
gentlemen, as you know, we take oral communications at the end of the agendized items, except for those individuals who would like to voluntarily limit their time to 3 minutes for the purpose of making public announcements of a broad general interest. And our first speaker is Doris Tweed. Welcome back, Madam City Clerk.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, Mr. Starbird, and staff. My name is Doris Tweed, and I'm here this evening on behalf of the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast Committee to again invite you and the community to the 46th Annual Prayer Breakfast. The breakfast will be held on March 12th, and this year we're returning to the Civic Auditorium where the breakfast was held for many years. We're excited about the move, and we're excited about our speaker, who is Tom Dreesen. He's a comedian, but not only a comedian, he's an actor, author, and motivational speaker. Variety called him a thorough pro, one of the most respected family comedians of our time. The LA Times wrote, "The audience was deeply touched and inspired by his passionate and motivating words, and Dreesen was uplifting, entertaining, informative, and well-prepared. We believe he will give an inspirational message with maybe a humorous twist." Tickets are $20 and $18 for seniors and clergy. Doors open at 6:15, breakfast is served at 6:45, and parking will be free, which is a nice change from the Hilton. The Master of Ceremonies will be School Superintendent Dr. Michael Escalante. Musical entertainment by Gabriel Rio Pazos, and he's accompanied by Adrian Goldman. He has been at the prayer breakfast a couple years. Rosemont Middle School String Ensemble will be entertaining, and our bagpiper will be back again, Aaron Shaw. So we hope you'll come, and I have tickets if anyone would like them now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tweed. I'm looking forward to it. Our next speaker is Joan Hardy from the League of Women Voters, and followed by Carol Hounsell.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Joan Hardy. I'm a resident of the City of Glendale. And on the behalf of the League, I am here to make an announcement. The League of Women Voters of Glendale Burbank will hold a candidate forum for the City Council and City Treasurer on March 12th at 7 p.m. It will be here in the City Council chambers, 613 East Broadway, 2nd floor. The public is welcome to attend. All the candidates running for City Council and City Treasurer for the April municipal election have been invited. The forum will be organized to allow equal time to each candidate to reply to prepared questions and questions from the community. Questions can be submitted to the League phone at 818-247-2407 or via our website, www.lwvglendaleburbank.org. In addition, we will take written questions from the audience at the forum. We do not ask personal questions, and no attacks on the candidates is permitted. The forum will be broadcast live on Glendale Government TV, Channel 6, and will be repeated at numerous times prior to the election. Charter Cable will underwrite the broadcast. The League thanks the City of Glendale and Charter Cable for their cooperation in presenting this event. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Weaver.
Miss? I thought that you might take back the League. That was always my favorite debate forum.
Which one?
Yours.
Oh.
League of Women Voters.
For candidates?
Yeah, I've sat through 6 of them. And as many as 18 forums in one election cycle. And I would like you all to consider doing yours earlier in the election cycle, because the candidates that don't know very much about government listen to the ones that do. By the time it gets near the end, they all begin to sound alike. Since this one is televised to all the listening people, we did it earlier on, one of the first forums, people at home would see how the people really think what they do or do not know. Just a thought for you to consider another year.
Thanks. I will
I'll be
be sure
here
to tell that
I'll be here to watch
board
yours.
members. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you. Direction our next. Pardon me. Let me try that again with the microphone. Carol Ann Burton of the YWCA. Thank you.
Mayor and council members, it's my pleasure to announce to you that we have a fundraiser coming up, our Harley Ride. It's on March 8th, so if you're not into walking downtown, you're welcome to come over to the Harley place, and we'll take riders, both single and double, 20 for a single rider, 30 for a pair, and they're riding from Glendale to Malibu. And we're welcoming non-riders to come over to Malibu, and for your ticket price, you get breakfast and appetizers and drinks over at the pier. And basically, we're trying to raise awareness for our domestic violence project. So I have flyers for you all, and I want to encourage everyone to come out.
Very, very good.
Thank you.
Mr. Quintero, are you going to run or ride in this event? You're going to bring your hog out and ride in the event?
Unfortunately, I'm going to be campaigning, but maybe next year for sure. No, maybe next year for sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for making the announcement. Our next speaker is Leon Mayer, followed by Bill Weissman.
Good evening, Mayor Draymond, members of the council, Mr. Howard, Mr. Starleaf. I'm from the Glendale Friends of the Library, and we're giving you a last hook on Ed Begley, who'll be here Thursday. That'll be at the library Thursday. Ed Begley has written this book, Living Like Ed, A Guide to the Eco-Friendly Life. This is his second book. He's not only a famous actor, but he's a famous environmental advocate, most famous Hollywood advocate there is. He's nationwide, and he's just fine speaker, fine writer, fine person. And we enjoy having him. And we already know that the Sierra Club's going to be there. I talked to Bruce Hale. They're meeting tonight, but they're going to be there Thursday to give him the backing he deserves, because it's very important that we respect our environment, and Ed is the one who will explain to you how you can do it on a day-to-day basis. So come and see us on Thursday, February 26th. Now, March 12th, not to be in conflict with the League of Women Voters program, we're having nationally known Is this picked up when I hold it up like this, or?
To us, I'm not sure about the camera, Mr.
I'll hold this up to everybody. This is Charles Phoenix. Everybody calls him Charlie Phoenix. He's a nationally known humorist and photo collector, and he's written books. And he has photographic books. He goes all over the country, and he's coming to the Glendale Library on March 12th, and to show us his books about America the Beautiful and California and Southern California. He goes back to the 50s with some of these books, and it's just a treat to have somebody like him come to the Glendale Library. He also is famous now for being the Grand Marshal of the Doodah Parade in Pasadena just this last Christmas season. So anyway, those are our two current events. We'll tell you more about Cloris Leachman when I come here the next time. Any questions? I've already given out most of the flyers to the present audience, and I think everybody here has these flyers. Everybody should know it's free, and parking is validated from the Maryland parking structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. All right, Bill Weissman.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, city staff, and the public. My name is Bill Weissman, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the Crescenta Valley Community Association and the Far North Glendale Homeowners Group. We are hosting a candidate forum for city council candidates. The forum is going to be moderated by Dan Kimber, Hoover High School history teacher and Glendale News Press columnist. It's going to be tomorrow, Wednesday night, February 25th, starting at 7 p.m. in the Dunsmore Park Community Room. The address is 4700 Dunsmore Avenue in La Crescenta, or as we like to refer to the annex area as Far North Glendale. We hope to focus the questions in our forum on issues that haven't been discussed in the other forums so far. We know a lot of questions have already been asked of the candidates and answered by them, and we're hoping maybe to explore some new areas that haven't been discussed yet. And we're also very interested in the views of the candidates that relate to the issues in the northern part of our city. So it's open to the public. We'd like to ask anyone who would like to attend to come by. Again, 7 p.m. tomorrow night, 4700 Dunsmore Avenue in the Dunsmore Park Community Room. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Weissman. All right, that's my last speaker card for this portion of oral communications. Mr. Kasakian, our next item, please.
Next item is adoption of ordinances. At 7A is a urgency ordinance extending a moratorium on the installation of certain commercial wireless facilities within the city of Glendale and declaring the urgency thereof. This was offered on February 17th by Council Member Weaver.
Okay, let me let my colleagues know that I have no speaker cards on this item. Let me turn to my colleagues to see if they have any input or.
I'll move 7A.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other input on this? I hear nothing. So, Mr. Kasakian, if you would call the roll, please.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian? Mayor Draymond?
Yes. Our next item, please.
At 8, under 8A is City Manager regarding public noticing procedures. At 8A1 is a motion approving procedures.
Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Mr. City Manager, please tell me you don't have a PowerPoint presentation.
Mr. Welch does not have a PowerPoint presentation, and I'll go to him.
And I'll make my comments very brief, Mr. Mayor. The City Council this past year directed staff to create a formal policy on city public noticing procedures. The purpose of this policy is to stimulate public participation in the government process and to create a well-informed citizenry that is engaged in the local quality of life issues. This policy would cover both legally and non-legally required public noticing for city meetings and events. For legally required public noticing, City Council directed the policy meet or exceed statutory requirements. For non-legally required public noticing, City Council directed that the policy include a wide variety of media. It should be noted that several city departments are already practicing many of these procedures and that this action will formalize these standards. Staff has listed a menu of procedures for your review this evening. For both legally and non-legally required public noticing, City Council recommended that the formal policy include the utilization of a mass phone communication system. Now, this system would allow staff to contact residents and business people on a neighborhood basis and a citywide basis. GWP representatives recently sent out a request for proposal, RFP, and are expected to bring the proposal for a mass phone system to the City Council in the near future. Some of the recommendations for your consideration this evening include all public notice signs will be posted at the most visible locations on properties. Public notices will be mailed via the U.S. Postal Service to a minimum radius of 500 feet. This is contained in an ordinance currently before City Council. Legal notices will be posted on the city website. Also, staff will continue to notify interested parties throughout the review process. Under non-legally required notices, staff will work with the PIO on public outreach strategies. Notices will be disseminated using electronic media, including the city website, GTV6, and electronic mail. And press releases, of course, would be sent to the local media. There are additional issues that are contained in your packet under both of these areas this evening. With the adoption of a formal policy, the fiscal impact for each department will vary. Staff is recommending that departments absorb the cost for the remainder of this fiscal year, and that staff will need to make budget adjustments for the 2009-2010 fiscal year. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wells. Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Najarian.
Mr. Wells, do we have are we in any way attempting to collect a database of emails for our residents in case of emergency notification, as well as your standard legal notification?
Are you talking about a general interest list of people who are interested in issues that come before the city?
Well, we have planning issues that arise throughout the city in different neighborhoods, and if we had the emails, if we had an email list and we could go through them and segregate out the ones that are in that area as an additional means of notification. Besides, you talked about phoning, and you did mention electronic mail in
Yes.
general. But as a matter of course, as they sign up for an electric utility, perhaps, do we attempt at all to get a contact number by email that it could be just one more layer of notification that we would have available?
That's a very good idea, Councilmember Najarian. To my knowledge, and I would defer possibly to the Planning Director or Public Works Director, the only thing we do maintain right now are general interest lists of people who may want to be notified about certain projects or things that come before the city.
And does anyone think that's a good idea to try and accumulate that list?
I think that's an excellent idea, Mr. Najarian. I didn't want to interrupt, but I will jump in since you asked. You may be asking staff, but I'm also...
You're more important
I think
than
that's,
staff.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
They don't get to vote.
Well, in that sense, maybe, okay. But I think that is a very good idea. It's an extra means of communication,
Absolutely.
an extra way of reaching out, even if there's a project where some people are. We should be notifying the people that we know to be interested in development issues throughout the city. So whether or not they're in that 500-foot radius
Right.
or not. So I think that's a terrific idea if we can do that.
We can definitely look into that.
Okay, well, let's see if we can bring that back. Any other input? Mr. Quintero, Mr. Weaver?
Nope.
All right. Well, I will entertain a motion.
I'll move 8A1.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I have no speaker cards, and if there's no further discussion, Mr. Kasakian, if you could call the roll.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian? Mayor Draymond?
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Wells. Our next item, please.
At 8B is Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Services regarding proposed Glendale Narrows Riverwalk project. At B1 is a motion authorizing a memorandum of understanding with Northeast Trees, Inc., a nonprofit corporation, to accept Proposition 50 River Parkways grant program funding and to construct the Glendale Narrows Riverwalk Phase 1 project. At B2 is a resolution authorizing the acceptance of a grant deed from DreamWorks Animation, LLC for an easement for the Glendale Narrows Riverwalk project. And at B3 is a resolution appropriating $173,000 from the Los Angeles County 5th Supervisorial District Cities access funds for the Riverwalk Phase 1 project from the Los Angeles County Regional Park and Open Space District.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Let me go to Mr. Chapchin, our Director of Parks.
Thank you, Mayor Draymond, members of the City Council. What I'd like to do is ask Dave Ahern, the Capital Projects Administrator, to come up and give a very brief background on the project.
I had a PowerPoint.
Oh, background.
Very brief.
Well, background is good, as long as it's not in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
Mayor Draymond, member of the council, I'm Dave Ahern, Capital Projects Manager. The report before the council tonight asks the council to take three actions. First, to approve a motion authorizing the city manager to enter into a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, with Northeast Trees, who is the recipient of the grant funding, the majority of the grant funding for the construction of the Riverwalk project. Second thing that we're asking from the council is a resolution to authorize the city manager to accept a easement from DreamWorks when that easement is prepared and available from DreamWorks. And then third is a resolution of appropriation to appropriate funding that the city has received from LA County. So those are the three actions. This is all for the Riverwalk project, and I'm available to answer any questions that you may have.
Before we go anywhere with questions, I have one for you. I had a very thoughtful email, I think it came in yesterday, or last night, from an interested party in the Rancho area, and I think we may have all received it. And I think there's some confusion about the funding source and where it's coming from, what it can be used for, what it can't be used for.
Sure.
I think the basic sense of the email inquiry was, shouldn't we be using that money to put more police on the streets or repave roads or other things? Can you explain for the public what the source of the funding has been, what the collective sources are, and really what we can use it for?
Sure. These are state grant funds designated for park usage. The project's about $1.6 million. $1.1 million of that comes from the state and goes to Northeast Trees, not to the city of Glendale. So it is their grant that they've received for constructing the Riverwalk project. There's an additional $173,000 in county grant funds that were approved by the county supervisors. Again, it's at their discretion, and they approved it for the Riverwalk project. There's $235,000 in matching funds from Northeast Trees. Those are their funds, and Northeast Trees does many things. They're most notably recognized for their ability to develop projects along the Los Angeles River. So this is their funding that they're committing to that. The city has $110,000 in matching funds required in order to match the money from the state grant. So the majority of the funds are not city funds. And they are necessary for park development, not for other uses.
Right. So basically, for that $110,000, that's quite an investment because it ends up bringing us a whole lot of funding to this project. The other portion of the email. The other portion of the email dealt with what is the usefulness, in essence, of the Riverwalk project. It's only, in other words, the Glendale portion is only one segment. So how does that fit into the larger scheme of the development of basically a Los Angeles River Walk corridor? Who is to the south of us? Who is to the north of us? Where is this going? Are we actually cut off? It's just a small segment.
It is one segment in a series of segments that connect Los Angeles to the valley. So the entire focus of this is connectivity, and this is our part in that larger project. To the south of us would be Atwater Village and projects along LA. North of us is Burbank and the valley.
So someone wanting to make use of the Riverwalk ultimately will be able to bike ride, run, walk, go out and just basically enjoy this on a long stretch.
Sure, all the way down to Union Station into the Pueblo de Los Angeles.
Okay. Thank you, and I apologize for my colleagues for speaking out of turn, as it were. But I did want to clarify that on behalf of the email. It was a very intelligent email, and I just wanted to raise that issue. Mr. Weaver.
Did you have to get clearance at all from the Army Corps of Engineers?
Yes, that's a requirement. The LA County, the Corps of Engineers, City of Los Angeles, there are a number of agencies involved in this.
And if I could just expand on your questions.
Please.
When I was with the Corps, the LA River was my project for over 10 years. And I also handled the permitting for the Corps. And what we're basically referring to is bicycle trails that, by segments, the city of LA funded them, eventually to hopefully roam the entire 52-mile length of the LA River. This particular reach, I know, in emergencies, this was my reach of the river that I had to travel on both sides of the river. In this particular area, you could not navigate it by vehicle past. This is going to help, and when the flyover bridge is done, then I assume there'll be connectivity from there to Verdugo Wash. I hope someday we can take it up Verdugo Wash as far as Oakmont. It is feasible, but well, this will be a nice link that was impassable for me. I couldn't do it. I had to go on the other side of the river to navigate.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Quintero.
Well, I'm very excited about it. I'm glad we're moving forward. It is going to be something that's going to benefit the entire region. It's happening as we speak. The Northeast Trees, they do a great job. I've seen some of their work, and I think they're the right people to team up with. So hopefully we'll get it built soon so we can all enjoy it.
Okay. Councilmember Najarian.
Mr. Ahern, when we last spoke, I think we were concerned about these funds being held up by the state. So that issue is resolved currently with their budget resolution?
Not yet. The state budget has been passed, but the funding has not been released, and we don't have a firm date on when it would be released.
Okay. And my next question, again, goes to that email and the mayor's comments about connectivity. Is it possible to, looks like if you continue eastward and southward, we're going to skirt the power plant. Are there plans to connect that further east and south?
Absolutely. Not as a part of this component. That's the next phase.
But eventually. Okay. I'm happy with that. I was worried that, again, the emailer seemed to imply that this is going to be it, this segment, and there's no plans or no ability to take it further. So I think it's important to understand this is a first small step for a greater overall regional plan. So I'm happy with that.
Okay.
All right. Are there any other questions for Mr. Ahern or Mr. Chapshin or no? Okay. Mr. City Attorney, there are
Take them all together.
3 components here as a housekeeping issue. Can we take these together?
Yes, sir, you may.
All right. Very
I don't know
good.
if you have any speakers.
Yes. I'm so sorry.
You forgot.
We do have.
Mayor,
Yes.
I have one question.
Yes,
if
sir.
we can. Mr. Ahern, we're all resolved with DreamWorks and that issue of the easement and the location of that power box or whatever there was.
We continue to work on that with DreamWorks.
So you're hopeful that will be resolved? Hope.
Mayor Draymond,
Eternal.
members of the City Council, we do have a verbal agreement with them. We are trying to formalize the agreement with a memorandum of understanding. So
I know that was an issue previously.
we did talk to them about 2 weeks ago, and they are committed to it.
Thank you.
All right. Very good. Let us go to the public. Our first speaker is Margaret Hammond, followed by Joanne Hedge. Pardon me.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, staff. I am, of course, in favor of this wonderful river walk. Now, I understood that our part would connect all the way down to Long Beach. Huell Hauser's movie, and maybe we ought to get it here, shows that their segment from the city of L.A. ends at Los Feliz. And is our segment going to continue down to Los Feliz? I mean, are we going to be just a piece stuck in the middle between that won't connect to that? because that would be useless and stupid if it wasn't going to connect the whole way. According to the newspaper article, it said that it would be connecting all the way to Long Beach. And I don't know how far north it would go, but I mean, if you're just going to have a 2 miles or something in there, that would be pretty dumb. How many miles are we talking about with this grant that we will be getting from the state and the Northeast Trees and so forth and so on? Is it going to be all of the property that is Glendale's part of this Riverwalk? That's what I want to know in particular. I want to know for a fact, and I hope that DreamWorks is going to accommodate us with that easement, because otherwise then it doesn't seem like we'll go anywhere to have any way to have that park that we need there that is available to us, but we can't have the easement. Without the easement, we will not be able to use it. So I do think it's a great advantage, and I think in this time of financial problems, it's good for families to have alternatives to going to movies or doing other things. If they can ride their bikes and walk and have picnics over in that area, it would be a marvelous advantage, particularly for the people that are in the densest part of Glendale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hammond. Let me, you mentioned useless and stupid, so do we have representatives from that law firm here? Someone can come forward and answer that question, and also what portion of a mile is this?
Mr. Mayor, the portion that you're looking at tonight is a half-mile segment. The second phase is also approximate half-mile, and that's what we have in Glendale, is about a mile of frontage. The City of Los Angeles has plans that they've completed and plans that they're working on to extend it along their whole frontage on the river. We'll be meeting with the City of Los Angeles in the next week or so regarding Phase 2.
All right, and the issue of Hauser and Long Beach?
We're in favor of him.
You're in favor of both of them? Okay. Well, I'm glad.
We have no control over that.
All right. Mr. Chapchin, would you be able to speak and perhaps a little more, to respond to Ms. Hammond's question a little more? Well, the discussion was about Glendale connecting with Los Angeles and Union Station. Her question was she thought it was going all the way to Long Beach. That's the real question. Can you shed any light on?
Not really, Mayor Draymond. I think we'll take a look at what their plans are. I don't know if, John, do you know exactly? Why don't you come on up?
We are meeting with several, John Pearson, project manager of the Riverwalk project, and Mr. Mayor, Councilman. We are meeting with people from the revitalization project, the Los Angeles River Revitalization Project, in March to talk about connecting with projects they have coming up on the east side of the river through Atwater from Los Feliz. Their project stops right now at at Chevy Chase. And they're looking at the possibility of extending that. They're also looking at a possibility of a much larger project in the Atwater area that will be a focus of a demonstration to show what can be done with economic revitalization along the river. There are big plans for the river in Atwater that Los Angeles would like to do, and we hope to connect with that with Phase 2 of Riverwalk. The only thing we have any control over is our 1 mile within the City of Los Angeles, or the City of Glendale. We certainly hope to see eventually a path from Glendale all the way down to Long Beach, but there are a lot of things that are coming in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yes, Mr. Quintero.
Let me just say, I've been to a number of meetings, quite a few meetings, and absolutely, Margaret, the idea is eventually to be able to have a green river, a living river, an active river from Long Beach all the way up into the San Fernando Valley. So that's the ultimate goal. Obviously, it has to be done in segments. There's different jurisdictions, and different things theoretically will be taking place along the river. There might be a river walk bike path on one portion of the river, like the gentleman just mentioned. In other sections of the river, they're actually talking about doing parks and doing some residential and other type of activities. But the idea is to try to get it away from some of the concrete and try to kind of green the Los Angeles River. And hopefully we'll see it in our lifetime. That's the goal.
All right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Weaver.
Who's that again? The LA bikeway system started in the 80s. They've been building segment after segment, connecting from Long Beach clear up as far as we'll go. It's been built in I retired in 2000, but up to then I was approving many segments of it. It was a bikeway, but pedestrians can walk on it too. As far as the greening of the Los Angeles River, it will never happen because the hydraulics of the river do not permit it. They were designed with smooth concrete walls and concrete invert. You can't increase it without widening the river. That's the only way you'd be able to green it. The only portion of the entire 52 miles of the LA River that is soft bottom is adjacent to us in Glendale. That was done with drop structures and stabilizers, and to allow groundwater recharge. There's a lot of pressure underneath the LA River from water tables that historically have been up and lifting the invert. So you have the subdrain systems that drain the water into the invert of the river and down. That's the reason you have that one segment. But you'll never see the rest of it. I don't care what all these non-hydraulic engineers say, it ain't ever going to happen. I mean, the segments outside, adjacent, yes, they've looked at them, they built some, but you're not going to do it in that river. Not if you want flood control safety in Southern California.
All right, did you all get that about uplifting the invert? Okay.
I don't know how to say in layman terms.
We'll picnic along the banks anyway.
That's right, you can do that. That's legal.
All right. Our next speaker is Joanne Hedge.
My name is Joanne Hedge, resident of the Glendale Rancho and president of the Glendale Rancho Homeowners Association, but I'm also here as an enormous, humongous booster of the LA River. I mean, even if this Riverwalk plan never even existed, the river is so magic and so special, and I've lived almost 14 years, 2 blocks from it. I've pedaled down both sides. I have ridden my bike all the way to the 110 freeway several times, which is way past where the official Velo path ends at Fletcher Drive. But at any rate, what one has to keep in mind, and it is brought out beautifully in the KCET production by Huell Hauser, which is repeated every so often, and everyone should see this. It really explains what this is all about, but it involves a lot of different agencies, county, state, Army Corps, Glendale, Northeast Trees. I can't say enough about how wonderful they are. They have installed pocket parks along the area of the river near what's called Frogtown, just above the 110, and these are designed for conservation and recreation. They are designed so that runoff full of car oil and other dirt from city and so on is percolated through the soils, the way they arrange things before it flows into the river, and then it's clean when it goes in there. They have had enormous success with neighborhood involvement and boosting, even by groups that won't even graffiti these places. They love it so much. So, and of course for my own local neighborhood, being equestrian oriented and so on, I am really looking forward to the general enhancement of the overall Riverside Rancho by a project like this, because it is, if you've ever walked from the foot of Garden Street behind Disney and behind DreamWorks, it is extremely run down, broken bottles, graffiti. It's the confluence of the I-5 and the 134. This area really needs a boost. I can't believe it's in Glendale that we wouldn't want to enhance it and beautify it. So it's a major beautification project. The Trailhead Park at the foot of Garden will be lovely. It will have benches for people to sit and have their lunch if they work at Disney and DreamWorks or other places on the campus there. There will be native plantings and conservational efforts. And there's even a very modest but enhancement and upgrading of an equestrian ring right at the trailhead too, which we're looking forward to, which I'll go into in greater detail at another time. Anyway, I am hugely supportive of this project, and I'm open to any of your questions at any point along the process. But you've got a lot of people, hundreds of people are behind this, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hedge.
Mr. Mayor, may I add one more thing?
If it's brief, we do need to move on, Mr. Weaver.
Yes, it's brief. Just show you, illustrate, down at the Arroyo Seco, where it joins in, it's concrete 15 inches thick. We had to replace that because you could stick your finger through that concrete. It eroded. Why? Because the petroleum fields underneath the river at that point were near the surface, and it's percolating up and creating sulfuric acid, kneading away the concrete and the rebar. That's the condition out there today. So it's going to be a long time before you create a vegetable garden in that river.
And what if I like picnicking next to
I
those
said
kinds
in the
of
bottom.
contaminants, Mr. Weaver?
In the bottom.
Okay. All right.
All right,
Mr. Quintero.
I'm prepared to move 8B 1, 2, and 3.
I'll second it.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any other comments? There are none. Mr. Kasakian, if you would, please.
Council members Najarian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Yusefian, Mayor Draymond.
Yes. Our next item, please.
Next item at 8C is Director of Public Works regarding parking facilities property management contract for the city parking structures and the Glendale Transportation Center. At C1 is a motion authorizing the city manager to execute a 39-month agreement with 2 one-year extension options for Modern Parking, Inc. for a total contract cost not to exceed $5,755,306. At C2 is a motion authorizing city manager to execute an amendment with Parking Concepts, Inc. to extend the term of the agreement in an amount not to exceed $725,546 to facilitate the change in operations expiring on March 31, 2009. And at C3 is a resolution appropriating $311,242.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Let us go to, who am I going to? Mr. Zer?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you.
That's bonus.
And let's see if I can get through this pretty quickly. Back in July, staff brought to the city council reports that went over the process we had gone through, the request proposal process we had gone through for the operation of our parking structures in the Glendale Transit Center. At that time, we explained the proposals that had come in from the 6 firms, the evaluation committee that we had put together, the results of the evaluation committee, and their rankings of the 6 firms. At that time, staff recommended to the council that we be allowed to negotiate with what was the top 2 firms, 1 and 2. And while the top firm, Modern Parking, Inc., was clearly number 1 and had the lowest cost proposal of any of the 6 proposers, staff had indicated some concern with at least a couple of areas that were in their proposal. Those were primarily ensuring that the labor costs were meeting the labor needs for managing the facilities. The other was the insurance. The cost was proposed was very low. We wanted to ensure that it was valid insurance, that the carrier was valid, and that the coverage was sufficient. And the third issue was the security. The security estimate given or proposal given by by Modern Parking was very low. We wanted to ensure that the level of security met our needs. In the event that we could not come to an agreement, staff had recommended that then we would be able to go to the second number 2 ranked firm, PCI, and negotiate with them. The decision of the council at that time was to direct staff to go back and negotiate exclusively with Modern Parking to determine if we could come to some agreement on the outstanding issues and some satisfaction to the concerns we had, and then to bring that back to council. Since that time, staff has been negotiating with Modern Parking and their team, and then we have addressed the 3 outstanding issues. We have checked the labor and are satisfied with the labor levels that are being provided. The security costs, while low on the proposal, the security being provided meets the standard that we expect. And in fact, Modern Parking has admitted that they are subsidizing a portion of that security as part of their agreement. The third issue is the insurance. Working with the city attorney's office and the risk management staff, we've determined that this is a valid company. The coverage is sufficient to meet the needs and the requirements of the city. And therefore, we have come to satisfaction on those particular issues. There are two other issues I'll mention, because they will be mentioned later tonight, I'm sure, that came up after the initial council direction. One of those had to do with a protest letter we received from the number 2 firm, which was PCI. That had to do with the accusation or allegation that Modern Parking had not fully disclosed some of their past contract situations with a former client in which they had been allegedly fired. They gave us the contact information for that firm. We contacted the firm. We sent a letter to the firm to verify if, in fact, that was true. I have copies of that letter for you. Ask Mr. Howard if you could. The result of that was we never received a response back from the firm. They did not verify that the allegation was in fact true. We asked for it in writing. It's a serious allegation. We wanted to make sure that we documented, and the firm never returned this form back to us. In a subsequent conversation with this individual, staff confirmed that they would not be sending it back to us. So we did not get to document the allegation that had been made.
Could you repeat that last part, Mr. Zern? I'm sorry.
After having sent the letter, not receiving a response, we followed up with the individual to see if it was forthcoming, if they were going to be sending us something. They indicated no, they would not be sending us a response. The final item that I wanted to mention was originally when we took these proposals in almost a year ago, the target date for startup was July 1st, 2008. Because of the protracted negotiations, obviously we are outside of that window and now targeting a April 1st, assuming this was to be approved tonight, an April 1st startup date. Because it's our practice to get our contracts on a fiscal year basis, we asked, or we negotiated with Modern Parking for an additional term to make the contract from what was the original 36-month term to 39 months, which would then get us on to a fiscal year schedule, and then we added the 3 months to the original agreement. So that has resulted in certain increases to the original contract amount that was proposed, but that additional amount was because we asked for that quote in order to get the contract onto a fiscal year basis. I also will mention one last item. If in your council report, you'll see under fiscal impact, it breaks down the multi-years of the contract. There is the MPI proposal. Then there is a second column that indicates contract costs. I just wanted to explain what that was. These are fixed city costs. These include contingency, maintenance of security equipment, and certain supplies. We fixed these costs at the level that we felt appropriate. We didn't want this to be an item there was overhead or other items put on it. So we fixed that cost and assigned it for each year. In other words, this would have been assigned to any of the contractors, regardless of who ended up faring the number one firm. With that, we are available for questions.
All right, and I'm sure we'll have some. Thank you, Mr. Zern. Let's see, we have a number of speakers. Let me ask my colleagues if they have any comments or questions before we go to the public.
I have a question. What exactly was the question which was asked regarding termination on the RFP or the RFQ, whatever you had done?
I'll ask Mr. Bagdanian to see if he recalls the exact language. It's an RFP, yes.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the question is that we request the proposers to list if they've had contracts have been terminated in the last 3 years. So we did not receive any of the proposals did not indicate that there was any contract that was
in the last
3 years. That was the requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Bagdanian.
Was that signed under penalty of perjury? I mean, when they...
There's a requirement they signed all the information that is in the proposal is valid and they under penalty.
Under penalty of perjury? Is it under penalty of perjury, Scott?
I don't have the exact language with me, but I
Or
can,
just to the best of their knowledge and belief kind of thing?
I think it's the best of their knowledge that it's valid because we're dealing with their
I'm
cost
hearing it is
proposal
not
fees.
under penalty of perjury.
It's not penalty of perjury, but it's valid.
All right, thank you. We will go to the public then. Okay, our first speaker is Chuck Jalogian. I'm reading the spelling correctly, followed by Jerry Skillert. Skillert.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Chuck Jaloyan, and I'm here tonight representing Central Parking. This is really interesting. We were up here before. A couple things I just want to state, and I'll be very brief, I promise. We, too, sent a protest letter, and somehow Central's getting knocked out of the loop here a little bit, and I don't understand why. If I recall the council meeting correctly, there was talk about negotiating with the second and the third companies because there was just a minuscule amount of money separating these proposals. Back on September the 12th, we sent a letter to Mr. Howard and never received a reply. But we had some very, very grave concerns about this. First, let me say, I know staff's worked very hard on this issue. So have we. We've been here for 5 months listening to issues that are going on in the community because Central always looks at the bigger picture. Besides providing excellent parking services and excellent customer service, we also want to know what's going on in the community. We want to be part of the community. And Natasha from my office was here for probably 5 months, every single council meeting. Jerry Scalette will be up here in a moment talking about the process a little bit, and we really believe this has been compromised. This doesn't smell good. I mean, I think Modern has gotten another really, really big bite at the apple here, and what I would urge you to do this evening, very respectfully, is to take item 8C and do not pass the first part of the motion, but pass the second part of the motion. Extend the current contract for a few more months, and let's do this the right way. Any parking lot company would be very, very happy to mobilize in 30 or 45 days to get such an outstanding contract. And this has gone on for several months, and I don't think there's any real harm in doing that. So please consider extending the current contract. Not all contracts are worth fighting like this. Central does not make it a point on contracts that we are not the successful bidder to get up here and talk like this. But on this one, I think it really, you listen just how your questions are being answered. It's vague. We're not sure. It's perjury. It's not perjury. There was a company following a council member going to a gentleman's home. We very respectfully have called Jono to try to get a meeting. We can't get meetings. So, it's one of those things. I think it would be very smart and prudent to take a step back, to look at what the other two companies could provide for this wonderful city and then go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Could you state your name?
Sure. Chuck Jaloyan.
Thank you. Before we go on to our next speaker, which is Jerry Scalette, by the way, is that the case, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. City Manager? I don't recall that as being correct. I don't remember direction from this council directing staff to enter into negotiations with 3 companies. I think that there was comment from at least one council member asking for that. That was not the consensus of this council, as I remember it.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, you are correct. Mr. Zern just showed me the previous motion that was adopted by the council. It was to negotiate exclusively with Modern Parking.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Scalette, followed by John Gantis.
Mayor and council members, thank you. I'm Jerry Scalette, Vice President with Central Parking System. And I just have a few comments. I guess there's good news and bad news. The good news is that this is a hotly contested contract, and if you remember and go back and look at the original reports, the points totals between the companies were 1 and 2 or 3 points out of 100, so it was very, very close. In the cost issue, I've reviewed the documents at length. In the cost issue, in this bid ended up being really the deciding factor. If you take a look at, again, this report, and you go back to the previous report, and unfortunately I was a math major at Kansas, so I can't help but look at the numbers. That's what I do. You'll see that the contract that's been negotiated with Modern Parking is $574,000 more than their bid. Even if you just add the 3 more months of into that contract based on their current bid, that number is still much higher than what their bid was. And I guess the point is really two things that concern us. Number one is that I think that admittedly, even your own staff has said that the proposed company is going to subsidize, they underbid the contract, they're going to subsidize the security with their own profit, if there is any, to make their number. Well, we all know that's a bad situation for the City of Glendale when a number has not been bid correctly. The second thing is it looks as though in the negotiation process they've been able to increase their numbers. And again, for ourselves, Central Parking, and even Parking Concepts, this is very unfair, because that means the process for us would have been, let's underbid the project, come back and negotiate a final contract, and that's how we're going to win this bid. And I know that that's not the intent of staff, and I know that wasn't the intent of this council. So I believe also this process has been compromised. By public disclosure, all of the bidders now have had a chance to look at the numbers. They've had to look at the proposals. This has gone on for 8 months. And what we're asking you to do is start this process over again. Extend Parking Concepts contract, but let's start over again and do it correctly. I think the City of Glendale deserves a much better answer than that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Skellett. John Gantis, followed by Robert Hindle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is John Gantis, 100 West Broadway, Glendale, California, and I represent Modern Parking, the proposed contractor. We were indeed here on July 22nd, and on July 22nd, we told you then that we are prepared to hit the ground running, and on February 24th, 2009, we are prepared to hit the ground running. I'm basically here to answer any questions. I think Mr. Zern accurately presented that. Let me just emphasize the nature of the negotiations, because I was a part of those negotiations. These weren't 1 or 2 meetings. These went over a period of, we started almost immediately after July and ended basically like in January. So we had this was a long process, many meetings, very difficult negotiations with very, I think, competent staff. I've obviously known them for a while, with attorneys, with staff, and the numbers that were properly justified. They asked us repeatedly to justify the numbers. The security costs that were brought, this wasn't a mistake. We purposely bid this. We knew exactly what we were doing, and we, throughout the negotiations, we substantiated those costs and the ability to underwrite those costs. To talk about the increased costs, Mr. Pitts will probably speak to that, but the way this has worked now is basically the original bid was for the years that ended 2000 and for the year, what would now be year 3, because that was when it was going to be. Year 1 was going to be the previous 8 months of this year. So what we're looking at are costs that are coming in for the year 2011, 2012. I'll let Mr. Pitts do that. But basically, I'm here to answer any questions about the process. I think this has been properly vetted. It went through an RFP process. We indeed were the low bidder. We indeed have negotiated the contract, and we're prepared to honor the contract as written.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Hindle. Robert Hindle, followed by Gary Pitts.
Yes, good evening. My name is Robert Hindle. I'm Vice President with Parking Concepts, and we have been your parking service provider for the past 10 to 11 years or thereabouts. I have already submitted my comments to you in letter form. I think I've copied just about everybody I could think of with our position and our objection and our request. Very briefly, our problem is the unfairness of the process for us. At the last council meeting where this matter was addressed, staff had requested permission to negotiate with a number one most highly qualified company, which was Parking Concepts. We were ranked highest in every category over every company except price. And Modern had submitted a price, my opinion, artificially low. And it sounds like their approach is being successful. Bid the job low, get in negotiations, move the price up. That's what has happened. And it's not just because of the additional 3 months. That 3 months, of course, extends the overall price for the term. But if you back that out, their prices have increased approximately $5,000 per month. My background, my history with negotiations, usually when you negotiate with somebody, you improve your position, not the reverse. That's what's happened here. The fairness issue, I'm not referring to staff. They've always been more than fair, very professional. They're good, hardworking people. My problem, my belief is that the process has not been fair. I won't repeat myself. Staff had requested to negotiate with the most qualified, which is us, at a low price, which is Modern. For some reason, that was not authorized. And so the staff was limited to negotiations with Modern, and the result was their price came up. Well, maybe if we would have been negotiated with, maybe our price would have come down. And also, it's my understanding that the points awarded for price was never reevaluated after the subsequent submissions, after negotiations or evaluations. The only price that was ever evaluated was the original submission, and there was subsequent submissions. I don't think that's fair, and I will stop it at that. But I would also request that this process be done over. Too much time has gone by. There's contentious issues. It's, in my opinion, in the best interest of the city to redo this process. I don't know how it'll come out next time, but it's been quite a learning curve for everybody. And I don't think anybody should be allowed to come in, submit an artificially low price, and then be allowed to negotiate up. And one final point, if you look at the cost analysis, Modern's price in their third year escalates considerably. There's big numbers plugged in that last year, and then that will be the basis for years 4 and 5. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Gary Pitts, followed by Donald Islam.
City Mayor, City Council members, I just want to represent Modern Parking and say that we have negotiated with the staff members for the last, seems like a lot longer, probably 5 or 6 months now. We did not change our first 3-year numbers. We stayed with those numbers. We negotiated with the original numbers. It's just been the length of the process due to the meters going in on Brand Boulevard and some of the other things happening in Glendale that we could not kickstart this process sooner. Modern Parking is ready to go. Modern Parking has negotiated fairly, and we respectfully request that you accept our contract. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our last speaker is Donald Islam. He passes. Okay. All right. Thank you. Let me now turn to my colleagues. This time I'll start on my right, or to my left. Mr. Najarian, any comment? Or question?
Yes, I have some questions. I mean, obviously, to me, a very important factor is whether or not Modern was terminated from an agreement. The fact that it was not indicated that they had not been terminated on the application, but letters to, let's see, who was this letter to? Was the letter to Timothy Rock or something? Timber Rock came unanswered, raise a red flag to me. So if there's someone from someone who is competent to answer the question as to whether Modern Parking has had a terminated contract within 3 years of what date was the application made or dated? February 08. I'd like to hear that. I'd like to ask him, and I'd like to, I think, credibility is a big part here. I'd like to know if we can place that person under oath and hear, there's some evidence here that they have been terminated. I don't know what the authenticity of this document is, but it's someone indicating that Modern had been fired. So is there someone from Modern Parking that can come up and answer that question and be willing to be placed under oath?
I guess I should have just stayed here. We were under contract with Timber Rock. We started a contract with Timber Rock in 2003. It was a 24-month contract. After the 24-month contract expired, it rolled over to a short-term 30-day contract. Timber Rock decided in 2007 to hire Parking Concepts, and we were released from that 30-day contract at that time.
Okay, so do you think that the response on your application is true and correct when the question asks if you've been terminated from a contract?
I do, and we believe that that particular question referred to being released from a contract period, initial contract period for cause, and we, as far as we know, we were not terminated for cause from that contract.
The contract you're under was a month-to-month, though?
Yes,
going
it was.
month-to-month?
Yes.
So when one side decides not to continue, don't you see that as a termination?
A majority of our contracts, well, I suppose is how you look at it. I mean, Modern Parking, whoever is selected other than the incumbent at this period is being somebody else is being hired to run the city contracts, not necessarily that Parking Concepts is being terminated from the contract.
Do you think that an explanation such as what you've just given us would have been a more complete answer on the application for the RFQ or the RFP?
Perhaps.
So my question then to Jono or whoever was ranking this, if had an answer such as the gentleman just gave been recorded on their application, would that have affected their score?
Well,
in the initial
interviews, we always do the reference checks after we interviewed all the proposals, and this issue, we had no knowledge about it until it was we had completed all the evaluations, they were scored, and we submitted the proposals and the staff report to City Council. That's when we then received a request during the period of negotiations that there is potentially a termination with the.
I understand that, but had that information been given, would that have been under references or?
It would be under the references that we would have checked it.
And what would that score have given them?
If we could substantiate that, again, on an individual basis, because the staff, we would have given them from 0 to 10, that would be a lower score. I would have to substantiate at the time with the city attorney's office as to how much materially that termination is valid or is not a valid situation, because that's why I personally contacted the firm to find out about whether or not they were terminated or not. They were not willing to give us any information, so I couldn't base on that if there was a termination. Actually, I personally would have scored it lower than the 10 points. Out of 10 points, they would have received a lower score. Because we also check all the other references that they're currently operating. For example, they operate in the city of Pasadena. We check with them whether they were fine with their operation. They're operating in Culver City. They were fine with them. So, collectively, you look at the references. You look at if there were any termination at the time. There were none. So we scored them 8 out of 10 points.
Since you're up there, let me ask a question, and moving on off of that to the question raised that the actual contract price is increased, even taking into account I understand the extended term to have it coincide with the fiscal year, the additional 3 months or so, 39 months instead of 36 months. But even that taken into account, are the monthly charges, if you do it bi-monthly, consistent with their original application? Or is it higher, as some of the others have said?
The original contract cost has increased in the fourth year, which is because we had a 3-year cost proposal. We negotiated a fourth year. In that fourth year, there is a 5% increase in the total contract amount. Every year, any of the contracts you look at, depending on CPI, the contractors increase their costs based on the maintenance operations that they estimate that they would have to do in the parking structure, so somewhere between 2 to 5%. So they've increased in the fourth year that we negotiated. Wasn't part of the original proposal. There was a 5% increase in the total cost. In addition to that, as was stated in the staff report originally, modern parking cost proposal for the security cost was lower. In other words, they're subsidizing in the first 3 years of the contract. In the fourth year, they didn't want to subsidize it, so there is a $45,000 increase in the fourth year, which basically closes that gap of what they are actually charging. Their subcontractor, Kadima, is charging them for security on an hourly basis versus what they had originally proposed. There was a difference of $1.75 an hour. So in the fifth year of the contract, they could not take any more reduction in their total cost. So they are fully charging us for the hourly cost that they're being charged by their subcontractor. So that's the difference, that there is a $193,000 increase overall. But if you look at the Modern's original cost proposal in comparison to the second cost proposal, which was PCI or central parking, which was only $5,000 difference, Modern's cost proposal was $560,000 lower than the second and the third. If you subtract the $193,000 increase that we had as a result of the extended period and the increase in the security cost, still there's a $375,000 savings to the city over that 39-month period. So our goal was, because the price was a major factor, still create a situation of a negotiated contract that would still have a savings to the city. Of course, if we had negotiated with the other 2 or 3 companies, there's a potential that they would have reduced their costs, and that gap would have closed, would be smaller. But we only negotiated with Modern. We made those adjustments that was necessary for that 39-month period.
One of my concerns back in July was the amount of insurance, which really is dramatically different between the companies. Modern's insurance premium is $64,000. The others are a good $100,000 and more, sometimes $170,000, $180,000 greater. I mean, what's your opinion on that? Is that legitimate?
Councilman Najarian, we had our risk management, I think Mr. Howard can also further explain that. We had our risk management look at that, their insurance certificate, making sure that it met the requirements as was outlined in the RFP, and it met the requirement. The carriers that they were proposing, they are valid. They have the ratings that is necessary. So it is true. They have a big difference, about $100,000 less than the average of all the companies that proposed for the insurance.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Najarian. Councilmember Quintero.
Can I just say one more thing, please?
Yes.
In reference to the account, the terminated account that we've been referring to, I do have a letter that was given to us by the owner of that property at the time. And if I might just read it to you, it said, "Dear Mr. Pitts, Santa Monica, Arizona, at 16th LP, which owns 1245 16th Street in Santa Monica, California, and is managed by Timber Rock Commercial Real Estate Services, no longer requires your services effective March 1st, 2007 at the above stated address. We have been very pleased by your professionalism, and we hope in the future we can do business again. Now, I'll pass this around just for reference.
You can give it to the city clerk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Pitt.
Thank you.
Mr. Quintero.
Well, it just so happens that I've parked in that building in Santa Monica for many, many years. It was so long ago, I'm not sure that you were doing the management. But anyway, it's a small medical building. What interests me is whether the city of Glendale, if you don't mind, Mr. McDonough, whether the city of Glendale, in taking this contract with Modern, are we going to make more money from our parking structures and other managed buildings with Modern?
Councilmember Quintero, in terms of the total contract costs, there will be a $375,000 savings in comparison to the second and the lowest in terms of the total cost.
All right.
No question that the operation management cost keeps going up because the labor costs have gone up. In terms of, we've just recently changed our rate structure, parking rate structure. Although we're providing 90-minute free parking, we've had an increase in the rate structure. So technically, we should be seeing more revenue coming to the parking garages. And it is true because, and it is happening because we have the parking meters on brand. We're shifting some of that parking that was occurring for free on street. People are parking in the structure. So we have seen a steady increase in the usage of the parking structure, which translates into additional revenue. With any parking contractor, we always look at ways to cut costs down. One of the things that we've envisioned once we take on the new contractor will be to further automate our parking structure so that it's ticket, in other words, attendant less. You will have a central pay. You pay at the exit before you pay before you get your car to exit, which is the technology is available, and many structures are going to that. That should cut our labor costs at least 40% in the parking structures, regardless who the operator is. So in general, we are looking at those types of things in order to reduce the cost. But in most of the parking structures, pretty much regardless of who operates it, you still have the same, cleaning costs, operator, electrical costs, elevator maintenance costs, etc. So there shouldn't be.
But the bottom line is that this new contract, there will be more money coming to the city of Glendale.
Yes.
Because it's a lower bid.
The lower price.
Okay,
yes.
That's good enough. That's good enough. Like I mean. Okay, so at the end of 8 months or however long it's been, I am prepared to support, is it Modern? Yeah, I'm prepared to support Modern Parking, the new and successful bidder. I think that committee was put together, an RFP was extended to the parking companies, and this company had the lowest bid. They're going to subsidize their security forces, fine, as long as the city doesn't subsidize it. What they do with their subcontractors is fine with me. The insurance costs are lower. The city attorney has verified that they're legitimate insurance companies, so that's fine. In terms of the protest letter, like I say, I happen to be very familiar with this a medical building there in Santa Monica, and what matters to me is that they have a contract with the city of Pasadena and with the city of Culver City. While I rarely go to Culver City anymore, I go to Pasadena on a regular basis. I park in their parking structures, and they certainly have an efficient delivery of parking services. In addition to that, I know they also have private parking contracts with large companies here in Glendale off of Brand Boulevard and off of Central. So all in all, I don't see any problems with this particular company. I think the previous company also did a good job. PCI. I think PCI did a good job with our with our facilities in the past, but if we issued an RFP and we came in with and someone came in with a lower bid, and then we negotiated, as you always do, with the lowest bidder, and you come up with a solution, I think that's it. I don't see how we should now do. What do we do? Another 8 months? Another 6 months? Why? We had an RFP, and as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty well done. And raising the red flag of, I guess that's been negated with the letter that was produced, but if you have a contract, it goes for 2 years, and then it terminates, and then you go on a month-to-month, and eventually you get a nice letter from the property owner. I don't see that as being any kind of red flag or anything else. So I'm for just completing the process, and who knows, 3, 4, or 5 years from now, maybe PCI will be back. And I'm also very cognizant and very happy that, in fact, the Metro, the new contractor, will be the new contractor will be hiring, will be extending employment offers to the existing PCI employees. It appears there was an existing contract with the current employees, and they're going to continue to pay those wages. So, to me, if we make $325,000 out of the deal, then that's fine.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Quintero. Mr. Weaver.
Well, during my infamous career in engineering,
I was going to ask you to clarify which career was infamous, Mr. Weaver.
the engineering career,
All right.
where I was a project manager on major projects, multi-million-dollar projects, handled the budget for the Corps of Engineers for a decade or more. I reviewed so many contracts, breakdowns of contracts. Even when I was on the Airport Authority, I did the same thing there. And things get kind of intuitive with me. I've seen bids broken down where it just tells me something isn't right. And that's where I am here. I know you're not required to accept the low bidder in an RFP process. And I worked out some numbers too, my math side of it. And what I wanted to get was an average of the 5 applicants, not including modern parking, and compare that average against modern parking, because all the others are so much higher than modern parking. And I came up with, if I did the numbers right, on staffing, modern parking staffing is 14% less than the average of all the others. Their security is 24% less than all the others' average. The insurance, it's 68% less than the average of all the others. The management fee is 4%. And the burden, or the burden total, 46% below the average of the others. That really gives me concern. When I hear about subsidizing in this economy, you're going to take it out of your hide when people are just trying to keep a business running? It doesn't add up to me. Maybe it's legit. All I have to go by is the reports I've got here. It doesn't make sense. I've seen these kind of contracts, not saying this one is, but I've seen plenty of them, where all of a sudden the person that gets the bid is back to the agency or whatever, asking for more money. Oh, I didn't see this, I didn't see that. They've read the contract, they know where the loopholes are, they know where to go, where they can legitimately get more money out of a contract that they saw before. Seen it many, many times. You think you got all the bases covered, and you really don't. And that's just what it seems like here. I went in the back a minute, but I don't know if the letter was read that I received. This came from Sircon. Did you read that one? Or it says came out, says, I wanted to thank you. Quick note, thank you on behalf of the Santa Monica Medical Building. Is that the same one? It says, since we have hired your company, in this case PCI, and firing Modern Parking 2 years ago, our revenues have increased 40%. I don't know if that's the letter that was read. Things just don't make sense to me. Only when I know to sort it out, and I know Mr. Quintero doesn't want to hear it, start this blasted thing over again. Apples and apples, oranges. I'm hearing too many people complaining from other companies that, hey, you negotiated this separately and you added this on. I'm sorry, this just doesn't seem right to me. So I can't support it, and I won't. If my colleagues want to try to make the motion to approve this, I will be voting against it. I think it ought to be done over. It's a large contract, and we have a lot invested here. I remember going through the taxi process, too. That was a long one. So I'd rather get it right than doing it wrong. May the best man win. If Modern comes in, fine. But it just doesn't add up in my head. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weaver. Well, this is going to get a little more interesting. Mr. Zern, can you please tell me when exactly did this come before us the last time? What was the exact date?
July 22nd was the...
July 22nd of?
2008.
Okay, 2008. Okay. Thank you. Well, I'm going to make a couple of suggestions as to why this doesn't make any sense to some. And it's because this is not just a bidding process, it's become a highly political process. I don't know Mr. Pitts, I don't know any of the people who have spoken here today who represent these three competing parking companies. And lo and behold, I was I think the one guy on this council that wasn't lobbied the last time around. I know that Mr. Weaver found that someone showed up at his door at his house trying to lobby them.
My wife said I wasn't home.
I guess I was the new guy, and so lo and behold, here we are 8 months later, and I'm sitting here as mayor, and I still don't know these gentlemen, and but I keep hearing about all kinds of lobbying going on. Obviously, it's a good contract because three entities wish to come to Glendale. One wishes to continue working with this contract. We've heard some strange ideas put forth here, at least to my ears, strange. If I engage someone, a contract, and that contract runs its course, and I opt to go a different way or don't renew the contract, suddenly they've been terminated. We've heard that one. So does that mean that who preceded the current contractor, by the way, Mr. Zern?
10 years ago.
Before PCI is Central.
So was Central fired by the city of Glendale?
No, they just were not awarded the...
But they didn't have their contract renewed. What
That's
happened,
correct.
Mr. Zern? Did we fire them?
No.
Were they terminated?
Were they terminated by the city of Glendale?
No.
Mr. Mayor, we went through the same RFP.
That was a rhetorical question, Mr. So you can rest.
Oh, they were not fired.
It's on the record. It's on the record now.
But I thank you for being right, jumping right on that. This is somewhere, but this is what happens when straw men get together and have illegitimate children with undue political influence somehow. That's my view anyway. Another thing that I heard here today, and I am going to ask Mr. Zern and Mr. Pitts, the comment was made with regard to Modern that their plan is to subsidize their security with their profits, if there is any. Is that what the plan is?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the way it was presented to us is that Modern was going to subsidize, had the means to subsidize the security for the first 3-year period.
Was there anything there that indicated that if they don't make a profit, they're not going to do this?
No, not,
well, because
not
that
to
was the
us.
clear inference, and that was the exact quote. Mr. Pitts, I ask you the same question.
Yes, it's a pass-through contract, and we are prepared to pay the security contractor.
Well, what happens if it's not profitable? Then you're not going to pay the security?
No, we're going to pay them regardless.
Okay, so it's only if you make a profit? No.
No, we're going to pay the security contractor no matter what the outcome.
Let's see. Moving from the ridiculous to the more ridiculous, Mr. Bagdanian. Now I do want to, and that wasn't a reference to you. It's a reference to my own comments that are going to be in the form of a question to you. Please. That was not a reflection on you. That was a characterization of my own comments, because I think it is an example of when red herrings and straw men begin to date one another. This is the offspring. If, let's say, Parking Concepts had an employee that went berserk in one of our lots, and they had the contract, and they took a baseball bat and started shattering windshields, would that have lowered their score?
Of course.
Well, what about if one of their employees had brought their pet dog to work with them, and it had turned out to be rabid and had bitten one of the city employees on their way to and from their car? Would that have lowered their score?
Mr. Mayor, any of the incidents that we will look at their performance over the 10-year period, for example, PCI never really had any problems.
Well, my point is, would those kinds of things... But did any of those things happen?
None of those happened for PCI.
And if the accusation that had happened been raised, and you checked into it and found that they hadn't happened, or it was just, I mean, would that affect their rating?
No.
Of course not. So is there some substantive thing that the city found out related to modern parking that should lower their score based on an accusation from a competitor bidding for the same contract, that something untoward happened when their contract simply expired and they weren't the contract went elsewhere? Did we find anything out about that?
We couldn't verify the issue that was raised by PCI in writing.
Right, by a competitor who was saying something untoward happened. Mr. Zern, did we find that something untoward happened?
No, we did not.
Did we make an effort?
Yes, we did. Mr.
Did we call after that?
Yes, we did.
That? Well, so basically, thank you, Mr. Bagdanian. Thank you for indulging me in that. So basically, my feeling is this. We had a process, and the process was a bidding process. And lo and behold, someone who hasn't been in the mix before here in Glendale had the lowest bid. And what I'm hearing is a lot of complaining and a lot of political influence being welt and dealt by the two former players. That's it. We have a process. And I'm sticking to that process. It's not like we're talking about a company that is unknown in the industry. They're a major entity within this industry. What I see is the desire of two other contractors trying to encourage staff and encourage the council to go throw the process out the window and start again because they feel it's unfair. Why? Well, they didn't get the bid. The part of this that really does bother me in kind of a personal way is the employees. And I'm glad that Mr. Quintero raised that issue, because I would have had he not. Beyond that, I'm prepared to support Modern. We went through a process. That's the process. When that contract is done and there's another RFP, if someone else is the lower bidder and all other sort of straw men explode, well, then we'll look at it then. If they are exploded through discussion here and we find out they're not really issues. they're accusations from competitors who didn't win the bid. That's my view on this. And frankly, I was even against this idea of, well, because one competitor who didn't have a successful bid complained, we go into an 8-month process where we're fishing around to see if we can find something. And, okay, well, we can't get our guy in, so we'll just direct staff to look at 2 of them. And we even had a third contractor here saying, well, actually, I think what this council decided was to talk to all 3. That never even happened. So anyway, there's a lot going on here that doesn't really have much to do with the RFP process. So I want to come back to the RFP process. Stick with that. And let me just ask one last question of Mr. Zern. Is your staff, including Mr. Bagdanian, comfortable with this contract?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are, Mr. Mayor.
Is there some red flags or bells or whistles here that are telling you there's something wrong?
No, Mr. Mayor, we've had ample time to vet that out. And at this point, we have not found anything.
All right. Now to the complication that I alluded to at the beginning. It kind of sounds to me like we may have a split on our hands here. So I just put that out there. I don't know what motion will carry the day and where this vote will go, but there is a possibility of a split here. So is there any other input from staff or council members? Mr. Quintero.
Yeah, for the record, I just want to say I don't know any of the principals of the 3 companies, although I do know Mr. Gantis, who represents Modern, and I do know Mr. Sahikian, who's sitting in the audience, but I'm not exactly sure what group he's with. And I do think that all 3 companies are absolutely competent. That's obvious. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with Modern. If they're working with Pasadena and with Culver City, then obviously they know how to run municipal structures. So I'm prepared to, I'll make the motion because I think it's been 8 months. We had a low bidder, and so I'm prepared to move 8C1.
As revised, the date in the original motion was incorrect.
Well, that is the revised motion.
Yes, sir.
8C1 as revised.
All right. Mr. Quintero, I will, not hearing a second, I will cede the gavel to you, and I will make the second.
Okay, any more comments?
Yes.
Jerry.
I just want to remind everyone that this is not a contract for bottled water where it's fungible between each and every provider. We're talking about something where the services, and many times the only contact many people have with city services are through the people that run our parking garages. And Modern was not the highest rated in terms of quality of service. So although they may have been lower with price, we're not just buying bottled water where the lowest bidder is clearly the obvious choice. We're dealing with quality, and that's a large factor in my consideration. Thank you.
Okay, having the gavel, I get the final word. As mentioned and this is, it's mentioned in the staff report, they will be hiring some of the very workers that are currently working for parking concepts.
Yes.
So hopefully the level of service would remain the same. Mr. Kasakian, roll call, please.
Council members Najarian?
No.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
No.
Yusefian? Mayor Draymond?
Yes.
Carry over.
Pursuant to our charter, the matter gets carried week to week unless the majority of the council would either take it off calendar or move to continue it to a different date.
Well, I will entertain a suggestion from my colleagues at this point.
Goes over to next week. Heavy agenda or light?
Mr. Starbird, Mr. McFall, could you look at our agenda for next week?
Turn tape on. Giuseppe watches the tape. All he has to do is make his comments.
Relatively light agenda on the 3rd.
I'll roll over.
Is that acceptable to Mr. Zern?
Mr. Mayor, if I could just add something, if you could indulge me. On our agenda report, the number 2 item, which is the motion authorizing the city manager to execute the amendment with Parking Concepts. This is to pay them to continue to operate our system. They've honored their original price. As you may have seen in their recent letter, they continue to want to honor that. It's possible we could get at least a vote on that so that we can continue to have those services and to pay them while we work out what the final word.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move 8C2.
All right, but
it does have a sunset of March 31st. If we go beyond that, we will come back to you.
But before we move on to another motion, going back to 8C1 and our look at the agenda. So next week we have room for this. Okay. Let me ask my colleagues whether that will work for them.
It's automatic under the charter unless the council votes
we were
differently.
to continue it
Yes,
for
sir.
another date. Yeah. All right. So it looks like that is the consensus. We will do that, and let's move on then to Mr. Weaver's motion at 8C2.
I'll second it.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion? None? Mr. Kasakian, could you call the roll?
Councilmembers Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian? Mayor Draymond?
Yes. All right.
And 8C3 will go over till next week
Till
as
next
well.
week as
It's a
well.
resolution of appropriation.
Okay. Very good. All right. Thank you all. Our next item, please.
Next item under hearings at 9 is 9A, Fire Chief regarding 2009 Annual Weed Abatement Program. At A1 is a motion approving abatement order directing the Agricultural Commission, Director of Weights and Measures, to abate the nuisance on each declared parcel.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Is Chief Scoggins here? He is here. If we have questions, I don't have any speaker cards for 9A1.
It's a public hearing.
Pardon me?
Public hearing.
Yes, I know it's a public hearing, so we should open that, but to state that we have no speakers for that item.
Sit down. We'll call you if we need you.
Hang on 1 second. The crosstalk is so much up here that I'm just sort of waiting for it to die down, that's all. All right. We'll close the public hearing. Mr. Najarian.
This is the annual weed abatement where properties throughout the city are inspected for safety in terms of brush clearance, and you can either self-certify or you can have it cleared yourself, and if you don't, we're giving authority in this action item to the Agricultural Commissioner, Director of Weights and Measures, to send his crew out to do the cleaning, to do the abatement. So my question is, first off, that's happened to me in another city, and it's pretty expensive. Can we in any way utilize and mobilize our GYA to be one step ahead of the Agricultural Commissioner in terms of the clearance of the brush? I think it would be a win for the youth in the GYA to the extent that they're available, et cetera, as well as to the property owner, which will probably get a lot cheaper bill. I mean, they go in there and they've got a foreman and they've got this and they've got that, and you get charged for every weed whacker that they're using. It's really an exorbitant bill. Has anyone thought of that possibility, to sneak the GYA in one step ahead of the Agricultural Commissioner in terms of the clearance of the brush?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Najarian, and Harold Scoggins, Fire Chief. That's something that we can look at, but I think it would depend on the complications of the brush clearance on the lots that we're talking about. Some of them are pretty complicated lots that you would not want the youth in there trying to clear, and it could become a hazardous situation for them. But Doug Nichols can speak to that a little bit more, but these lots can be pretty dangerous for the youth and the GYA to go in there and try to do this work. This is not the type of work that they go in and do.
Well, I just want to say, I know Mr. Quintero has vouched as to their abilities, and he's got a pretty steep lot. They clear your lot, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, aside from that, I mean, I understand that certainly there's concerns, but there surely must be some opportunities to facilitate this on the more safer.
We'll take the time to explore those opportunities to see if there are any for the youth to go in and take advantage of. We'll take the time to look at it and try to figure that out.
What about unemployed goats?
Unemployed goats. I'm not sure where we get that list from.
Mr. Weaver, our term doesn't expire till 2011.
They did.
But we'll take the time to try to see if
They
we can.
did our hillside.
All right.
Goats did the hillside.
I know it's
behind
a
me.
thought, and it's not the exact item. It's somewhat different than what the action item is. So if you could come back to us through or direct it to additional departments that would be facilitated, that might be a good way to get some jobs for our kids.
All right. Are there any other questions for the chief regarding this item, or questions of staff in general?
Did you close the hearing?
We did that already, yes.
I move 9A1.
All right.
Second.
We have a motion, the second, and 9A1. Is there any other input? No. Mr. Kasakian.
Council members Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian? Mayor Draymond?
Yes. All right. Can we hear the item at 9B?
9B is another public hearing and is Director of Planning, continued from November 18, 2008 and January 20, 2009, regarding proposed ordinance amending Title 1, 2, and 30 of the Glendale Municipal Code and the South Brand Boulevard Specific Plan, relating generally to codification of zoning code interpretations, miscellaneous revisions, and minor cleanups, PZON 2008-005, and resolution establishing new fees associated with time extension requests. At B1 is an ordinance for introduction, and at B2 is a resolution adopting new fees.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Let us open the hearing, public hearing. By the way, I do have 2 speaker cards. Let me first go to...
You have 3.
I have 3, it looks like. Mr. Kasakian, is that for this item? Yes. All right. Let's go first to Kristen Aft, and then we'll see if we will go next to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This next agenda item, it was continued from a special meeting back in January, and during that meeting, council gave direction on some of the larger topics of this ordinance, specifically 4 of them. I'm just going to summarize quickly the direction of those topics and outline any changes and options for council to consider. The first item was related to interior setbacks for additions in the single-family zones, also more commonly referred to as the 456 rule. Based on concerns during that last meeting that elimination of this rule may encourage second-story additions at the expense of single-story additions, the council direction was to keep the current rules, so no changes are included in this ordinance. The second topic was rooftop equipment in single-family zones. There was general agreement and concern regarding the poor appearance of rooftop equipment as well as screening. So direction was given to modify the current administrative exception process by limiting the eligibility of the types of buildings that this may apply. So the administrative exception language is amended to apply only to the portion of a building that has a flat roof and when the building has no attic and no crawl space. Third topic, I'm kind of going to go out of order just briefly, relates to nonconforming buildings and structures as it relates to demolition and termite damage. The direction was given to address the abuse of nonconforming buildings and structures related to termite damage and other natural deterioration, and language is added to clearly eliminate consideration of these situations, and therefore any kind of demolition with any kind of termite damage, dry rot, or other natural deterioration is going to be considered voluntary and is subject to the 50% limits to maintain a nonconforming status. The fourth topic is walls and fences, and there was general agreement and direction to require review of walls and fences, and there's 2 options to consider to address review. First option is to require all walls and fences over 3 feet in height be subject to design standards, which would be a list of permitted materials, and require design review. And that review, staff would have the direct discretion to either exempt a wall or fence or send it to the design review board. This would apply to any wall or fence on the property. The second option is just a little more focused. It would require all walls and fences over 3 feet in height that are visible from the public right-of-way to be subject to design standards and design review. All other non-visible walls or fences would only be subject to some minimum design standards. A little additional component to these two options for consideration is the traditional trigger in the zoning code for design review is the requirement of a building permit. And if you'll recall, there is no permit requirement for any wall or fence under 6 feet in height. But after consulting with the building official, he has agreed to support planning and the use of this traditional trigger for design review and amend the building code, even though from a building code perspective, walls and fences less than 6 feet in height are not considered a life safety concern and is outside the character of that industry standard. If it is council's direction to initiate a building code amendment, we could return next week with that motion. So that summarizes the four general topics that we got direction from, and available for any questions when you're ready.
All right. Let me again go to my colleagues and see if they have any comments or questions now, or if they wish to wait until after we hear from the public. Mr. Najarian. Mr. Quintero. Mr. Wade. Okay. We'll go to the public at this time then. Our first speaker is Robert Taylor, followed by Garo Nazarian.
My name is Robert Taylor. I'm a resident and architect here in Glendale. My comment is related to the walls and fences. Could we consider, I know it's a little late, but could we consider the cost of improvements for walls and fences and weigh it against the cost of going through design review? Design review costs thousands of dollars. Replacing a fence that you're required to go through design review, $1,500. I think it's an unfair burden to make people go through design review if they want to replace an existing fence, for instance. And is the benefit, does it really benefit all of Glendale, or does it just benefit a few people? That's all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Garo Nazarian, followed by Myrna Stanley.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council, and the staff. Garo Nazarian, working for almost more than 20 years in Glendale. I am here to discuss that item number D, non-conforming building and the structures, 50% demolition, and the language that it's talking here, abuse of exemption. I don't see any. I never heard about the abuse of exemption, but I saw in different cases which that 50% demolition regulation applied when we started addition less than 50% or remodeling less than 50% of demolishing during the construction. When they find a situation in the old buildings that it's even asked by the inspectors to fix the other sides by counting the other sides of termite or the other damages, which once I saw in a building, the studs in a wall, it was not a one-piece stud, just 3 pieces of the studs nailed together to use as a stud, which is not a safe. So when they opened the building they demolished the building, they saw these situations. Of course, in the benefit of the city and the resident and the owner of the building to fix that issue. But by changing this regulation and to count every demolition voluntary and count it in 50% of the count, it will give very hardship to the people to renovate or to make their home safer. I'm against it, and I'm opposing to any changes to this code. And again, for the walls and the fences, most of the time I see that city council, council members of the Glendale, they are bringing example, the city of the Burbank, Pasadena, or other cities, that they are doing good jobs, looking to the other cities, all the cities, for this fence replacement or the changes, the same code or the regulation, it's the walls below 6 feet, no permit required. And really, we don't need that hassle to go through this design review board for replacement of wall or fence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Myrna Stanley.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Myrna Stanley, Paducah Woodlands West Homeowners Association. I just want to be clear that the language on page 5, the penultimate paragraph regarding the 50% demolition and termites, in your minds, does that reflect what we talked about last time? It may legally, but it reads, the demolition of any non-conforming building or structure damaged by termites, dry rot, mold, or other natural deterioration shall be considered voluntary demolition, and the rebuilding of any such building or structure shall be considered voluntary reconstruction and shall comply with the provisions of section whatever. What we want, if that says what we asked for last time, that when someone we wanted termites taken out of the basket of natural disasters. It doesn't belong in there with floods and fires. So we wanted that taken out of the equation, and that if someone demolishes more than 50% of their home, that it gets kicked up to design review first thing. Is that what this says? Because that's not how I read it.
Let's get a clarification on that.
Mr. Mayor, that is indeed what the intent of that language, to do exactly that.
It does. Okay, then I'm fine. It's on the record. Thank you.
And Ms. Stanley, since you are the last speaker here on this subject, I would, well, first let me close the public hearing, but let me just mention to you that I heard it the same way you heard it last time, and I was one of the ones yammering about it. So my question doubly goes to our city attorney to say, is that in, I think the word voluntary is what is causing the confusion there.
Right. The exception for having to comply with the 50%, or to comply with the having to rebuild under the new code, some of the exceptions were natural disaster, that sort of thing, and the issue was the prior interpretation by the zoning administrator saying that additional things such as termites and dry rot could constitute that. And the purpose of this language is to make it clear that that will no longer apply.
Let me go to my colleagues. I'll start this direction this time. Mr. Weaver.
I'm okay on everything. As far as fences and walls, I've listened to both sides of it from staff, whatever, and I tend to think that it should be option where all walls and fences surrounding the property are subject to design review. But the big caveat in it is the ability of planning to make the decision whether it goes to design review. 3-4 foot fence in the rear of the property. I would hope our staff is intelligent enough to really be exempting most of those fences from going to design review. Kicking design review does one thing, brings the public into the picture, the neighbors into the picture, which we want. But I doubt if we're going to see the abuse with the planning department looking at it and telling the applicant, you know, you're really skirting the line here. If you insist on putting this allowable material and you're going to put it this high and this close to your neighbor's property or whatever, we're going to kick it over. They have the ability to negotiate with that owner or that developer. I think it ought to be that way, and putting the permit on for the future, I think, makes sense too. Remember, if the planning department has the ability to pass on it, there's no additional costs. We're not running into design review costs, so I think that's the way to go. With the rest of it, I'm happy with everything else.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weaver. Mr. Quintero.
I'll support the recommendations.
Well, there's a question on the fence and wall.
What I said or the other?
Yeah, Mr. Weaver's idea is fine.
All right, Mr. Najarian.
I have a question on the walls and fences and option 2. says the option would limit design review only to walls and fences that are visible closest to the street. Staff would have the discretion to either exempt these walls or fences or send them to design review board. What sort of exemption criteria? I mean, has that been developed? Is the idea to set some standards, and if you meet these standards, then you're exempt? If you deviate from either material, color, size, that you would go to design review?
We would use primarily two sets of criteria. One would be that the types of materials that have been listed in the code, and then the secondary review would be compatibility, as we do with all sorts of design review. From time to time, you might get someone who might propose a wall that might meet those criteria for materials, but might be completely inappropriate for the type of building that this would actually be in front of. In those cases, we might either request the applicant to change that, and if they disagree, we might say, then you'll have to go before the design review board.
Because that's my concern. I mean, if someone's building a normal, quote-unquote, normal, compatible wall or fence, that they not be forced into the design review expense and time, and that staff have that ability to say, yep, this is normal, this is unobtrusive, this is appropriate and sensitive in color and scheming and mass and materials, that will give you that exemption. So is that reflected in option 2 then? Is that
well, the word normal is loaded, because in this case, what might seem normal for certain people might not be appropriate. For example, we were one of the photographs that resulted a lot of discussion with the neighborhood groups that the advisor group that we met. They might have proposed a wall that was appropriate in any situation, but in this particular type of architecture, the wall would have to be changed somewhat to reflect the Spanish architecture of the building. And we recommended that to the applicant, and in the end, the applicant actually changed the wall to reflect the architectural character. So we always have the ability to ask the applicant to change something to be more compatible with the building. Whether or not they'll agree with us is what might take the discussion out of the normal realm sometimes.
Let me give you this example. One of the most unusual yet tasteful walls I've seen are the walls in Dunsmore Park, where the previous owner has embedded certain artifacts in the wall. Scissor, have you been there to see that?
I've been to Dunsmore Park. I can't recall the wall that you're referring to.
I mean, it's several walls, and part retaining walls for planters and things. But it's a normal, I think, concrete or stucco wall. But in the wall itself, the face of the wall are, I remember scissors, and there's, I don't know, what else is there?
It's very much the idea of the Simon Rodia's tower, where he's embedded some of the implements and tools from his construction.
I knew that.
Milton Hofert is the one you're thinking of.
So something like that, I'm not going to hold you to any decision, but how would you view something like that outside of the setback, height being appropriate, nothing too crazy, color being, not gaudy, but having these unusual pieces? Hofert, who is it? Milton Hofert style.
As we do with all other types of exemptions that staff is asked to give, from time to time we might get to a point that the viewpoints on the aesthetic appropriateness of something might be disagreed by eligible people and by community members. If we think the level of disagreement could become controversial, we will be likely to require them to go to the design review board. Because we understand that the purpose of the staff exemption is to actually accept. We have a very low threshold on what we think we can exempt. But if something is so much outside that sane people could disagree on, we think that's worth taking the subject matter to the design review board for public discussion.
But you will, planners, being the professionals that you are, you will take into account the concept that walls are oftentimes artistic
yes,
and expressions of individuality. as opposed to just physical barriers.
Yes, and we might even recommend approval, an enthusiastic recommendation for approval to the design review board. But
That's what I like to
sometimes even if we are enthusiastic about a design, we may not feel that the rest of the community would agree with us.
Okay, I mean, it's a case-by-case basis, I understand, but I'm just sort of floating that out, so.
You know what? I have a question. In terms of the fees for the design review board, are they going to be the same as a application for a house, et cetera, or what?
If they, it would be the same process. So if they come for an exemption, they would be subject to the same fee for exemptions. But if they are required to go before the design review board, that with the same set of materials and the same set of plans and the same set of staff report. So the process is the same. Yes.
And how much will that be?
I'm looking at Kristen because she processes these on a regular basis.
Is it?
No, it went up to about around 800. I just don't remember the exact fee right now. It's around $800.
The fee would be in the 800
plus
range.
the noticing fees and plus the cost of production of the materials that will be reviewed. So it's not only about the fee for the review, but it's all the fees that go along with them.
I'm just chuckling a little bit, Mr. Najarian, because most of the structures that have prompted controversy that have come here, at least since I've been here, and actually, frankly, long before I came here, the issue doesn't seem to usually be about their artistic merit. It's usually quite the opposite. But in any case, Mr. Hagani, what is the essential difference between the section that Mr. Najarian read and what Mr. Weaver was suggesting?
The main difference was whether all the walls would be subject to design review or only the wall visible from the public right-of-way.
All right. Let me ask a question not related to walls. So let's suppose this moves forward, and a situation like, coming back to termites, a situation like the project on Neodrora comes forward. Mr. Hagani, is it your opinion that your department and this city are prepared to say, gee, there was an existing estate on this property, it's been basically removed, a whole new, different estate has been built there, landscaping's gone, it's mostly hardscape in front, it's a different house altogether. Is this city prepared to say, you know what, take it down, and then we'll talk about moving forward? I mean, because there weren't permits to do this.
I can only answer part of the question. It is, I can tell you that if this is the direction of the City Council to remove the procedure that the zoning administrator has been using thus far, to include the removal of buildings beyond the 50% rule. So if you change that procedure based on the proposed ordinance, then yes, I can tell you that the planning department is prepared to say that at this point you have passed the 50% point and you will be subject to full new design review processes and maybe the design review board review if that's appropriate, as opposed to saying that your exemption continues beyond the 50%. That part I can say yes, but the rest of it, maybe the city attorney can answer.
Well, that's where I'm headed next. Thank you. I am going to turn now to Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia, it's a multi-million-dollar home that's been built essentially outside of the normal permitting process because we've been having this unusual and unseasonal influx of termites that has just caused the destruction of an entire estate. We've built a whole new one without permit. Are we on firm legal ground to say tear it down and then we'll talk to you about your design rather than the process now, which is, we'll pretend that the house they've already built really isn't there and we wink, wink, nod, nod, and then we go off to DRB and say, now all of you pretend that this house doesn't exist. This is the design we'd like to build.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, first of all, hopefully the intent here will be that people will be on notice that they cannot exceed the 50% rule, except for the exceptions that are currently in the code. If somebody did do that without permission, we would be on certainly a lot stronger legal ground to say you must tear it down before you could proceed. However, we must caution, again, we could bring a case and a judge could very well say, you know what, allow them to apply for their permits to legalize it before tearing it down. That's all. That's the best advice I could give you at this point. That we would certainly be on stronger legal grounds to order them to tear it down. But a judge may, we can't act, we'd have to go to court to get that order, and a judge may say, no, let them apply for permits to legalize it.
Well, putting aside the idea that if the city ever engaged in that once, I have a feeling it would be the very last time we'd ever see it come again. But let me ask you one more question, Mr. Garcia. If we were to do, well, if that situation were to arise, and we had this question, would you view that it is better city policy from a legal standpoint to, I don't know, in my view, I guess, err on the side of advocacy for the public, or to err on the side of we shouldn't worry about, or we should worry about going to court because we might be overturned? I mean, what direction would you set this council down, legally speaking?
We would look at we'd have to look at each case on its facts. Keep in mind that the exemption that has been utilized previously was allowing homeowners to rebuild a part of a home that no longer complied with code. And so to the extent someone has built something that no longer complies with code, again, we'd be on stronger legal grounds. I think, we're hearing what the direction of the council is, and so we're going to be taking a much firmer ground on these. But again, I can't say on every case we'll be able to get the court to agree with us on that. But we're listening. We are listening.
Go down that road, though.
Right.
Would you advise that we go down that road if we had that circumstance sitting before us, or would you say, we're on somewhat shaky ground legally, we're going to have our heads handed to us?
No, and again, I wouldn't take the position that we would be on shaky legal ground. I would just say there's always a chance that a judge would disagree with our position.
Okay. All right. I thank you. One second. We do have a motion, by the way. That was Mr. Weaver, did you make a motion yet?
Oh, we're just going to introduce the ordinance sometime.
Sorry, I thought you had. Mr. Quintero.
Well, on this particular issue, it is beyond me, using that same example, how someone can do the kind of work that was done on that house, and there's another house that I'm familiar with in another neighborhood. They can do all of this work without permits, and basically the city does nothing about it. At the end of the day, it almost seems like the more excessive they are, the more they screw up.
The more termites.
The better, the more, well, not even termites. Sometimes it's windows, whatever it is. But it's like the more aggressive they are, the more they screw up, the less the city literally does to these property owners. So, I don't know what it takes. Does it take stronger codes? What can we do so that people understand, no, you can't do it. You can't tear all the windows out, and you can't do additions without permits. What exactly do we need to do to tighten the situation up so that regular people that follow the laws aren't, in fact, they're being punished. They're the ones that are following the guidelines, following the laws, and the other people aren't, and they get away with it. So I'm just curious, as a general proposition, what can we do to try to make it a more law-abiding situation?
Councilman Quintero, members of the council, a couple things. Again, I think something you mentioned, strengthening the codes, and I think this is, in that sense, in that regard, a strengthening of the code. It removes an ambiguity as far as what can be done under the guise of keeping your non-conforming status. The second point is obviously the staff, planning staff, neighborhood services staff, legal staff, all look at these cases and look at whether or not an individual property owner is trying to game the system, or if there were innocent mistakes, and we take each of those cases on its own facts and go forward in that manner. So, yes, I think the code is being strengthened, and we are looking at them in a closer light in that regard.
Well, are there any other code changes that we can make that come to mind? Because I'm prepared to support them. If you come up with some
other... If they're not included here, we couldn't deal with it
not tonight.
anyway, so.
Not tonight, but just in general.
Yes, we're constantly, if I may, Mr. Mayor, answer the question.
Absolutely.
We're constantly keeping track of those types of code amendments. That's why if you've noticed that we have been coming back to you at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, with a list of code changes. And that's because we carry a list as we come across them, and we will keep bringing things to you to strengthen the code further.
When we notice things aren't working, they come back
Because,
to you.
look, I think people sometimes they make a mistake in sort of good faith or just don't know. I mean, maybe they're new property owners, so they make a mistake. But then there's other times when too many things have been done to a house where any normal person, any reasonable person would know that they had to get a permit.
Mr. Quintero, I want to jump in here. A mistake, and then there are the cases when they know. I mean, oops, I put a second story on my house. Oops, I went down and asked for a permit to exchange windows in a second floor that I don't have a permit to have there in the first place. Oops. I mean, come on. Look, you had 5 council members up here ranting a few weeks ago about the fact that we need to start the process of erring on the side of the citizens rather than the guy who comes in and is gaming the system. And in every one of these cases, when I sit and ask staff about it, they say, yeah, we know what they're doing. It's not a mystery. I guess, Mr. Quintero, what's bothering me about the last series of questions is, thing was, we're watching for those that we may be watching for them, Mr. Hagani, but then how do you explain 2 really amazingly obvious situations, at least in my opinion anyway, Neodrara and Andinas? How do you explain those if we're watching for them? And staff is telling me, well, we knew what was going on here. As to coming back once a year, don't stay away so long. We're happy to hear from you far more often than that. And the answer to your question, Mr. Quintero, as to why, what can we do? Well, political will and political backbone is a big part of that. It is the city council saying to staff, you have the support, you have the collective political capital from the elected officials to actually make these regulations mean what they say, to act on them. And so I come back to the same question. Are we prepared? Are my colleagues prepared to say to staff, somebody builds $1 million, multi-million-dollar home and they do it without permits? Are we going to say, tear it down and then come talk to us about the design? I'm willing to go there.
My answer is yes.
That's my answer, too.
That's a rhetorical question, but my answer is yes. When someone goes that far through and even not even $1 million, but when they pour the foundation and they do the framing and all the rest of it, absolutely, it needs to come down if they didn't follow the law. That's it, as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Weaver.
May I introduce the ordinance at 9B1? Because it'll come back for more discussion when the ordinance is ready to be adopted.
That's option 1, Mr. Weaver.
Option 1, all walls and fences, permitting, and option to staff on whether it goes to design review.
Planning staff.
Yeah.
And how about the resolution adopting the new?
That's next.
You can make the motion now, or you can adopt it when the ordinance comes back.
I'll make the motion now.
I'll second it.
Let's see if we have a second for the first one.
No, it's an ordinance.
Oh, we want to take it as one. All right. Fine.
Ordinance I introduced.
Ordinance is just introduction,
It's
Mr.
over.
Mayor.
It's forward. Okay. And Mr. Quintero, you were...
Move the resolution at 9B2.
And I'll second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Is there any input on that, Mr. Najarian?
No, but before, don't leave this item after the vote. I have a question.
All right. Any other comments? I was just saying there was a message coming up from the senior planner. Anything, Mr. Foy, you wanted to, on this, smoke signals or anything? Okay, all right.
Why don't you take the vote and we'll...
All right, we'll come back. Mr. Kasakian, if you would, please.
Councilmembers Najarian?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Yusefian? Mayor Draymond?
Yes. All right. And we're not going to leave the issue. Mr. Najarian.
And so my question is, if I wanted to have option 2 considered next week, do I need to introduce that, or is that included in a...
You could make that change. I mean, if the motion to adopt the ordinance under option 1 doesn't pass, you can It would be a change to that to include option 2 would be germane, so you can make that at next week's council meeting. Or you can
How
introduce
about
it
as a
today.
competing motion?
You can do that as well.
I don't
done it.
have to introduce my option.
No.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Hagami.
I heard from Mr. Weaver that there was also an interest to amend the building code to maintain the trigger that for all fences and walls will continue, will be required to get a building permit, which is usually the way that we hear of these things. So if that is the case, we have spoken with the building official, and if the council's desire, we can bring that amendment to the building code in the near future.
That's when you will know what's going on.
Well, let me see whether there's... Yes, Mr.
I was just going to say, there's no requirement to initiate that as there is with zoning, so I think we're just looking for, make sure there's no objection to that, and then staff would bring that
I'm
back.
looking to see if there is a consensus on that. Mr. Najarian.
This is to bring back a building official with regard to
Building code
Building
amendment.
code amendment.
That would be a separate vote.
bring it back.
All right, Mr. Quintero? Okay. You have your consensus. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Mr. Kasakian, our next item, please.
Next item is returning to oral communication. And discussion is limited time is not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the council may question or respond to a speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and the city manager may refer the matter to the appropriate department for investigation and report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kasakian. Our first speaker is Margaret Hammond, followed by Greg Hill.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, and members of the council, staff, and audience. My name is Margaret Hammond. Next Monday, March the 2nd at 7 p.m., the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council will be holding their meeting. It's at a different venue than in the past. It's going to be at the Boy Scouts facility up on Glenwood. They have very kindly offered us the use of that facility, and we're very pleased. There's parking and so forth, and it's a nice facility. And as I said, they've offered us gratis that use of that building. And then on Tuesday, March the 3rd, it's Arbor Day, and that will be held at 10 a.m. at the Casa Adobe at 1330 Dorothy. And in case of rain, they're going to be at the Glendale Auditorium, and it will be lovely if we can have it at the Arbor Day, but with this rain coming or not coming, nobody is sure. Now, if you wanted to, in the meantime, purchase a tree either in memory of or in honor of someone, if you call Gladys Wymore, and her number is 246-3634 to purchase a tree, which will be planted in one of the parks in the city, and sometimes in special places. If you have a special place you wanted to have the tree planted in memory of your person. The amount is $45, and you make the checks out to Glendale Beautiful. Now, I had something else, and it's as a member of the Assistance League, I went to Horace Mann today to read. We have a program that's called Authors and Illustrators. I have to tell you, it's one of my favorite things to do. Particularly, I'd love to do it for the younger children, the kindergarten and the first and second graders. Their books are kind of descriptive. You go woof woof and arf arf and so forth when you're reading to these little ones. And it's amazing. They're absolutely fascinated with being read to. They find that it's wonderful. Matter of fact, the one class I was going to go into the classroom, and the children were standing outside, and one little girl ran up and put her arms around me and gave me a big hug, and some of the other children will say, "I've seen you before," and they talk away. And it's really a great program, encouraging children to read rather than sitting watching TV day in and day out. And this operation, the efforts, it's run through the efforts of the Assistance League, and we operate the Thrift Alley over on Harvard. That's how we raise funds in order to give. We give $1,000 to each of the schools we read at for their libraries, give them books, and so forth. So we do want to encourage that at the schools. And one of the other programs is that we have a school bell, they call it, and we dress some of the children whose parents are not able to perhaps buy them the uniforms and so forth. And that, again, is a wonderful program. And you get to meet the children and talk to them, and it's really terrific to be able to do that. So anybody that would like to, we'd love to have you come and join the Assistance League and help us. We need people to run the shop and to read at the schools and to help dress the children. And also we do a senior luncheon once a month, and that is a terrific program too. Now, the last thing I'd like to say is, can anybody tell me why Gladys Avenue has been closed for 3 years? I met somebody who's a resident of that street, and I asked him, why, did you belong to a homeowners group? He said, no, and I said, well, maybe you should. And you should come to City Council and ask. If Gladys Avenue has been closed 3 years, sounds astounding to me. I don't know how you could live on a street if it were closed. Although there are times that I wouldn't mind if Cypress were, what with all that traffic going up over the hill. We need bumps on that street. We truly need bumps on Cypress. They fly over that hill, and they are going that way because they don't want to go up to Chevy Chase. They come off Los Feliz up and across. Thank you very much.
All right, Margaret. Thank you. Greg Hill, followed by Carol Hounsel.
Good evening. My name is Greg Hill. I was at a meeting last night for the Transportation Commission, and it was for preferential parking. And what I found out kind of surprised me. They've got the definition of resident means a person who lives there. That seems pretty obvious, but I have a problem, I think, with resident, and it causes a total unfairness, in my opinion, with the way the rules are set up here. The street I'm talking about has 20 dwellings. 2 of them have rentals. Okay, now 2 of those right now, one house is trying to be rented. One of the houses with a rental is trying to, rent her a rental. Neither one of those got to vote, either owner, because of this word resident. And what also happens with your rules is those 2 houses, because nobody's voting, are still in the mix. So there's a problem, is what I'm saying, with the way the rules are written here. I would think anybody, an owner definitely should have some type of voice in whether his street is going to preferential parking, whether he lives there or not. I don't know. Does that seem crazy to you guys or not? And then they count against you. How can they count against you when there's no vote at all out of the owner of the property? And I just wanted to come this evening to point that out, that the rules here are just, there seems to be a total unfairness in that to me.
We will. The reason you're not hearing a response, Mr. Hill, is not because we don't hear you. It's that it's customary for us to wait until you finish.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
And if it's something that goes to staff, we'll refer it.
Yeah, I didn't want to bring up anything that went on, there or anything. I just wanted to bring up these rules because of the fact that the 2 units, which the owners can't vote because they're not residents, because they're trying to rent them, those 2 units count in the mix. And there are no votes, is how it works. We don't want preferential parking when the owners of them do.
Okay.
And that's the only reason I came here this evening, is to bring out those, that there's a problem here in the rules. And it seems like it should have come up before. I don't know how long you've had this set of guidelines to go by, but it amazes me I'm first.
it's been a while, and I'm sure more than one of us will address it. I happened to be there last night at that meeting. We have a council member who used to sit on the Traffic and Parking Commission, so if you stick around, you may get an answer to your question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Carol Hounsel, followed by Barry Allen.
Good evening, Mayor Draymond, City Council members, and members of the public. My name is Carol Hounsel, and it's with great sadness that I find it necessary to have to come here tonight to address the City Council. Being public figures, you may not appreciate the physical stress that accompanies the decision to come down here and speak out. I can only hope you have some appreciation of what it must take to put aside my own personal apprehensions, those apprehensions being overridden by my outrage at the situation I bring before you. I have attempted over the course of the last 6 months to follow all the chains of command and write the necessary letters, hoping to correspond with the appropriate city departments. Our correspondence today remains unacknowledged or unanswered. Why is that? Are the managers of this city so autonomous that they can't even have the common courtesy to write a letter or have someone else do it for them or even pick up a phone and call me? That leaves me no alternative than to come down here in front of God and everybody to try to bring some common sense and resolution to an injustice. I have provided you via Mr. Kasakian with complete packets of my correspondence to date. Without going into all the knockdown, drag-out details, I'm here on behalf of two elderly citizens of Glendale, Edgar Girth and Cecilia Curtis, in their plight with neighborhood services and, I assume, ultimately the city attorney. I have no financial interest in their property. I am merely a compassionate neighbor of theirs and find I cannot just sit by idly and see them terrorized and threatened by neighborhood services. There, but for the grace of God, goes my parents or yours. Last August, this couple, an 88-year-old man and his 83-year-old wife, contacted the city about a tree overhanging their house. GWP handles the property where the tree is located and came out and did a survey and discovered, as an aside, that a small attached deck on the easterly side of the house was encroaching on city property. Neighborhood services immediately descended on these people, resulting in the exchange of a few letters and ultimately a hearing that was nothing short of a kangaroo court. It also appears there is no appeal process to this decision. Records indicate that this deck was built in 1962, some 47 years ago. Since none of us were around when that deck was built, we turned to the surrounding neighbors who lived across the street for decades and who have somewhat of a reputation for being the neighborhood watchdogs. As a result, we have obtained affidavits from 3 of those neighbors telling us that the deck that we see today is exactly what was built in 1962. As the final coup de grace, the city attorney filed a lien on their property. So the only options being offered to the Girths are to apply for a variance or to tear down the alleged offending part of their home. Where they had no problem handling the intricacies and expense of applying for a variance in 1983 to build a deck on the westerly side of their house, 25 years later, this has become an overwhelming obstacle. The last correspondence from Neighborhood Services threatens them with criminal charges. So this elderly couple sits in their home waiting either for the police to come to the door and handcuff them and take them to jail because they're criminals, or the city truck to pull up in front of their house with a bulldozer and lop off the offending deck on the side of their house. Now, these may seem like ridiculous conclusions to you and I, but to these fragile octogenarians, these are their worst fears. I am not implying nor inferring that this couple is senile or stupid. Quite the contrary. They are very aware that they are being threatened and intimidated by the city of Glendale, but feel powerless to do anything about it. If we can't even get the city manager or the director of housing or the director of neighborhood services or the building official to answer our letters, who can we turn to? How can we be responsible and responsive citizens when we can't even seem to get the attention of those that we need help from? It's as if the management of the city feels that they're exempt from the common courtesies. I can't even begin to imagine the colossal waste of precious and limited resources that have been spent to date and are yet to be spent on this travesty. I would be delighted at any point to sit down with someone along with the Gers to try to resolve this impending doom. Is there anyone in the city with an ounce of common compassion, courtesy, and common sense who can help us resolve this issue? Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Hounsel, let me direct you to. Thank you. Let me answer your question first. Yes, I think there are many people who fit that bill. I happen to be sitting in this chair at the moment, so I'll be happy to do just that. Let's see if we can set something up with the parties involved. Let's get a report on what the history is from staff's perspective and what the issues are, and we'll do just that. And we'll see what happens. Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, we did have just such a meeting. Concerned with the history of this, and at least the picture painted by Ms. Hounsel. I asked for a meeting, and you're familiar with these meetings. We don't do them very often, but when we do, we bring together neighborhood services, planning, and legal. The result of that was we'd asked for more staff to bring back more information on I'll call it the alleged offending structure, to get more information on the nature of it, with an interest in trying to find some way to avert what I'll call this possible train wreck of what may be a structure that's been there for a long time but without benefit of permit. And we haven't had a second meeting to look at the result of that work. But our interest was in trying to find some way to justify not proceeding on the alleged illegal structure. And we haven't had that second meeting yet.
All right.
We've had everybody applying themselves to try and find a solution.
Let me say this. As we think back to our more recent wonderful track record in dealing with the tree ordinance issue and the couple over in far north Glendale, and the idea that we left them hanging, and that was one of the problems, leaving them hanging, not knowing exactly how they were going to be impacted for quite a period of time. That was part of their concern, and clearly that is it here. Mr. City Attorney, are you about to climb into a bulldozer and handcuff and/or bulldoze the offending appendage?
No, sir.
Okay.
Not going to happen.
Can we please get a hold of the Gertz, someone, and let them know where we... Excuse me.
From this meeting, I thought that was going to happen.
Where we are, and give them some sense of comfort that their issue is still being looked at, that we will look at it further, and that in the meantime, they should not be having a heart attack over this.
We will do that.
I just don't think it's... I mean, we mentioned a bunch of criteria here, but there's also the criteria of common sense as to how this is potentially impacting a couple of octogenarians that are living in our city. They're worried about a deck that is 47 years old, something like that. So, anyway, I'll be happy to sit in on that and make sure that we follow up on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hounsel. All right, Barry Allen, followed by Evelyn Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council staff, and of course the public. I'm Barry Allen. In response to hundreds of people asking whether Vanguardians is going to host a candidates forum, we are not. There's a good reason for that. The present system allows a candidate to provide the wrong information to the audience. Here are some examples. Councilmember Quintero stated that Glendale is in good financial shape with $450 million in the kitty. The moderator had no mechanism to call Quintero on that. Let me answer the statement by saying that if Glendale is on solid financial ground, there would be no question as to paying a few $1 million for a swimming pool, right? $450 million, the amount that it's invested, that's what the kitty is, draws about 1 to 2% interest. The majority of that money is restricted and can't be used for the whims of the City Council. Restricted funds are reserved for specified projects. Then Quintero went on to tell everyone that CalPERS is generating enough money that the city won't have to contribute. Frank must have had a better understanding of the meltdown than does CalPERS. CalPERS invests the money that we contribute, just like the feds do with our Social Security. Social Security Administration is going to run out of funds because we're living longer, we're now funding non-contributors, and the rate of investment return is falling significant. CalPERS didn't plan on local government rewarding workers with 90% of the last year's pay, and that the lifespan has increased to where 2 recently retired firemen will draw multi-million-dollar pensions from that. And by the way, CalPERS fund is going to go down about 24% this year, with the additional heartache of not meeting the 7.75% expected gains built into the assumptions of the system, a shocking loss of nearly a third of the value of funding. We also have heard, hey man, I bought all this open space, 525 acres. The taxpayers bought it at highly inflated prices that council negotiated through their surrogates. $15 million for Flint Canyon that had been purchased 4 years earlier for $475,000. And there's even more. There's more, but then somebody can blow smoke and self-promote to an audience with a short memory and tell them all the things they want to hear. It's difficult to get the facts out, especially when the moderator doesn't have the mechanism to get to the truth. On another matter, the city, as of last Friday, lost a lawsuit in federal court to the tune of $3.2 million or thereabouts for a civil rights violation in the matter of Ovisepian. My understanding is the matter was transferred to federal court at the insistence of the city attorney, as it would be a cinch to win where the feds require a unanimous vote by the jury. Apparently, the jury felt the GPD, the Glendale Police Department, conducted itself in such an egregious manner that it took only minutes to reach a verdict. The case could have been settled for less than $500,000. We're awaiting the outcome of 2 other lawsuits involving the Glendale Police Department. The Gladys Street debacle cost over $10 million, which is now listed as a land purchase, not as a result of a judgment. The last time someone brought information to the public in this form, the spotlight was shined on him instead of resolving the problem. The city spent its resources on a deposition for after-the-fact details. With all these expenses, not counting the $347,000 tree fiasco, the city council awarded the city attorney with a $15,000 pay raise. Now we know why council member Quintero says the speakers spew the same crap over and over again because he doesn't want the transparency or the openness. Now the city manager got a raise, city attorney, the police chief, all the people involved. Instead of pay raises, I would be looking for resignations. And the resources in support of this information is available at www.vanguardians.org, or you can call or send an email. Call this number or email that email address, and we'll send you the information. Thank you. I'm Barry Allen for the public.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Allen. Our next speaker is Evelyn Hansen, followed by Hausmik Nazarian.
Hi, Evelyn Hansen, longtime resident of Glendale. Earlier this evening, Mr. Weaver mentioned a case that was dismissed, or a case that the city won against a private citizen brought against the city. I ask you just a rhetorical question. What's more egregious? When a private citizen tries to fight the city, the behemoth that the city is, to try and make the city do something, reasonable or not, that individual thinks they should do. This person uses their own private funds against the city, or when the city brings cases against the Gertz, against myself for using mulch, for putting a light fixture without a permit that had been installed in my home in 1923, but no permit from me because I hadn't been born for a long time yet, or when the city goes after people for trimming a tree that they had been ordered by the city to trim. Which is more egregious? I have to think when the city, who has attorneys on the payroll who get paid whether they do anything or not. They get paid fighting or marching. When they come after us and we have to spend our private funds, it seems to me that it's got to be more egregious than when a private citizen goes after the city to attempt to cause the city to do something. And I have to think that that individual has to be more altruistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson. All right, Hazmik Nazarian, followed by Mike Mohill.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Hazmik Nazarian, resident of Glendale for over 25 years. I regularly watch city programs, especially oral communication. Recently, all I have witnessed is the issue of rent control, brought up by one individual who apparently has limited information, and despite her language barrier, she dares to translate for others and giving wrong information to viewers, ridiculing and wasting valuable time that can be used to discuss issues respectfully. This individual turns the whole scene into an embarrassing circus. She claims to represent an organization that its existence is questionable, and its members are her followers who hold the writing of their request upside down and have moved to Glendale just months ago and are not familiar with our city's issues. I would appreciate it if Mr. Mayor and council members would clarify if there are any rules to present this kind of nonsense. I expect to see citizens using this opportunity to have constructive discussions rather than having individuals who abuse this program, make a fool of themselves, and create disgusting scenes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Hazmik Nazarian? Oh, that was Hazmik. I'm sorry, Ms. Nazarian.
Mike Mohill.
Mike Mohill, followed by Gabrielle O'Sullivan.
Mr. Mayor, City Council. Councilman Quintero, now that you've been in office for 8 years, you find that the input from the public is crap. You discounted and devalued our words being directed at oral communication speakers during the Homeowners Coordinating Council forum last week. Here is a summary of the oral comments aimed at you in your past 8 years. You ran for the State Assembly while calling your opponent, Mr. Paul Kekorian, a terrorist. Glendale residents have to pay one of the highest utility rates in Southern California. You've received $15,000 in campaign contributions from the city unions just before the $1,000 contribution limits were to take effect. Then you approved the agreement that handed out $8.5 million in pay raises to all city employees last year. During your watch, a city manager retired last year with over $180,000 per year pension. During your watch, Mr. Quintero, we've only reconstructed 1.5 miles of roads in last fiscal year. The city has barely resurfaced any roads like Mountain Avenue, Central Avenue, East Glen Oaks Boulevard, or East Colorado Boulevard. However, we've increased the number of employees by 30% in the last 10 years, while the population barely grew at 5%. You helped put Glendale into hundreds of millions of dollars of debt since you've been in office. All these instances over your watch, Councilman Quintero. Please tell me, Mr. Quintero, whose crap is it, mine or yours? With your crude comments, you dismiss and debase individual residents and taxpayers as not having deserving standing voices before their elected officials. Isn't that like the government of Spain as they plundered and subjugated the people of the Americas during their colonial period? What voters need to do is flush out councilmen who no longer represent the public interest, are reckless with the taxpayers' money, and don't hold city management accountable for their waste, inefficiency, and bloated payroll. Mr. Quintero, you and your buddy, Mr. Najarian, also call people like myself vultures. behave and act in similar ways tell us how low this government has become and what we must do. With people like you, Mr. Najarian, I guess the rest of us citizens should join the ranks of the condor as an endangered species. Yes, the public is asking for a change. Change and change. I certainly agree. Hope and change, Mr. Quintero. And I think you, Mr. Najarian, should pack your bags and take Mr. City Manager along with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mulhill. Gabrielle O'Sullivan, followed by John McMahon.
Good evening, Mayor Draymond, gentlemen of the Council. My name is Gabrielle O'Sullivan from Luna Playhouse. I want to thank you very much for putting the issue of the future of Luna on the agenda with the Redevelopment Agency on the 3rd of March, I believe. But I don't think that any of you gentlemen have graced our theatre, and I wanted to extend an invitation to you for our present show. It's called Le Ronde, and I leave some flyers. If any of you would like to come and see the show, we'd be delighted to see you there, because it's hard for you to make a judgment on us if you haven't actually seen the quality of our work or seen our location. So I would like to leave some flyers with you, and if any of you with your respective spouses would like to come and see the show, we'd be very happy. And if any of the audience members would like to come and see it, we can certainly provide a discount if you let us know that you saw it through City Council. It is, however, a show for mature audiences. It deals with human sexuality and infidelity in a cynical but funny manner. So if that's to your taste, please come and join us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. John McMahon, followed by Mesrop Abrahamian.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council, City staff. My name is John McMahon, and it's been a few weeks since I've been here, and I came here throughout a couple months about a cell tower that was being planned for the front of my house, and I have not been here since we passed the moratorium. But I just wanted to come in person and say thank you to everyone. As you guys know, T-Mobile withdrew its application to put this particular tower in, and I just wanted to say thank you to the City Works and the city attorneys, and the city manager and the city council and the mayor for giving us the opportunity to discuss the issue. One of the things I've said before was we started to go around to the other cities, and I found myself really happy that I live here in the city. Once I've got an opportunity to see sort of the version of this table in like 3 other cities, and it's a little bit of a trip actually to walk in, but it's also just really interesting education. I find that this council, although there's a lot of people who come and have issues and complain and disagree, I found them to be more methodical and less influenced than the other cities I went to, and able to give people time to come up and say their piece and be educated and educate. So I wanted to say that. I don't know, I believe the moratorium went into effect the following week after we presented, which was I think the 13th, and it's a 45-day moratorium. Today being the 23rd, I think we're 40 days into that. I know Ms. Sansone said she was going to be reaching out to the public at some point, and I hadn't heard that. I have been not able to come the last couple weeks, so I don't know if it was renewed. It could have been. It was. Okay. So I wanted to pass out some things. Passing this. Right. Pass this out already. This is a little flyer that we did just on sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly on what we've seen in other city ordinances to try to give some information on what we've seen in other cities. The first thing on the list is that some of the other cities have combined a lot of other things into the ordinance, and I think that weakened the ordinance. For example, they put 2 and 3 foot high cable boxes into the same ordinance. I think a lot of the cable boxes now, they're trying to put them underground. They can be put underground in some instances or partially underground, whereas a 35-foot tower cannot be. So I've noticed that's one of the things that's weakened. Some of the communities have become concerned about, it's gone from sort of a fear of the federal law, the Federal Telecommunications Act, to a state issue with the Public Utilities Commission, which sort of regulates the right-of-way. And I think a good ordinance sort of jumps over the right-of-way. And I can give an example of that with the San Diego ordinance, which basically deals with setbacks. So if you say that a 20-foot tower has to be 20 foot from a residence, you sort of jump over the right-of-way in doing that naturally. The third thing is that was kind of fascinating was the same gentleman, I believe I got his name right here, Jonathan Kramer, who consulted with the city of Glendale, is also consulting with a number of other cities, but they directed him to write actually a much weaker ordinance, and because he does what he's directed to, I found it interesting that you can direct him to do less, and obviously I'd like you to direct him to do more. And then the extensions of time. Well, it's surprising that a city would direct him to do less, but I found instances where people actually did do that. And his response to some of the things in Pasadena was sort of like, listen, I'm doing what I've been told to do. Yes, I can go much further, but I've been told not to go there. And he was very vocal about that. So, and the last number 4 was about just extensions of time upon time. Again, I think this goes back to the ability that we were able to come here and be educated by the city attorney's office and get some information also to educate the council. I think some of the other cities, they're just not given that opportunity. So again, I'm happy to live in Glendale because in Pasadena, after 2 years, I was asked by a woman who runs sort of my version of that group over there, and I found that after 2 years of this issue being in moratorium, the council still did not really get it. They just didn't know it. I think that was a product of a number of things. But the one thing that I found was good, which I wrote on the back, was they had their city engineer in Pasadena do a GIS map, and it was clickable. So they could sort of, in the software, you could zoom in on it. And what it did is it showed what towers already existed and what boxes already exist in different areas. So they could sort of take one commercial area and put a number of things on it rather than have that same thing spread out among 10 areas. And I know Mr. Weaver, when we were here, asked, is a map being put together? So I just want to remind everyone of that. And I have brought with me, I'm sure the city attorney has copies, but I brought with me a copy of the San Diego ordinance. This is the ordinance that withstood the Ninth Circuit Court test. So it's a pretty good ordinance to use as an example. If anyone has sleep apnea or can't get to bed at night, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McMahon. Okay, that is our last speaker card. I will close oral communications.
No,
Oh,
we have
I'm sorry.
one
I'm sorry.
more.
It's the last part I had on. I'm sorry, Ms. Abrahamian. I beg your pardon.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Mesrop Abrahamian. I understand that last Friday a federal jury found 2 Glendale police officers liable for a civil rights violation of a young man who was wrongfully kept in jail for 8 months. The verdict of the case was in excess of $2 million. I heard that there was an offer made by the young man to settle the case. Is it true that the city rejected his offer and made no counteroffer? Also, since some of the damage award is for punitive damages against the police officers, will the city be paying the punitive damages on their behalf? And also another matter is the parking kiosks on Brand Boulevard. The meters do not allow a person to check the amount of time left to a parking spot without a special code printed on the paper receipt. I find this very wrong in its nature because if a spot is paid for in full amount and only used for a short time, the next person parking in that spot will have to pay once again for its use, an additional amount. Or if I want to add additional minutes to the time remaining on my spot but have lost my receipt, what happens then? I believe that this is an unfair and deceptive tactic taken by the city and would like to know what will be done to correct this matter. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, City Council members.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abrahamian. I will now close oral communications. Let me first go to the city manager. Let's start with the last issue first and work our way back.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I actually had a question for Mr. Abrahamian, if you could indulge me and if
absolutely
would permit.
Mr. Abrahamian, could you come back up to the podium? Thank you.
Mr. Abrahamian, are you an attorney?
No, I'm not.
Have you been asked to come here to speak about the case that's currently still outstanding by an attorney?
I have talked to other people about this case.
How about the attorney who represents the plaintiffs in that case?
No, I have not talked to them.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay. Let me start on my right, Mr. Najarian.
I have a question for Mr. Transparency, Mr. Barry Allen. You wouldn't mind coming up? You don't have to, but I know openness in government is one of your hallmarks. So, who told you about the offer to settle the case, Mr. Allen? Was it a councilman?
Are you asking me a question specifically regarding the oral communication?
You made a reference to an offer to settle the case. And I'm asking you, who conveyed that information to you? Was it a councilman?
No.
Who conveyed it to you?
I'm sorry, I don't think I have to answer that question.
Where's the transparency, Mr. Allen?
Wow.
How
Where's the
ironic,
transpa-
ladies and
It's
gentlemen.
very simple.
A man
It's-
who wants transparency in
It's
government
very simple.
refuses to answer the questions.
Well, I think maybe you should not have so many sessions, so many closed sessions, especially when the litigation is complete, other than post-trial motions.
You're being disingenuous, Mr. Allen. I really am disappointed for someone who harps on the council week in and week out and calls for openness and transparency. You yourself are denying the public that same transparency.
Well, guess what, Mr.
That's
Najarian?
hypocritical,
There's,
Mr. Allen.
There's such a thing known as the media shield.
Oh, I
The
see.
shield is something that
Oh,
I
yeah, the-
invoke in order to
Yes.
protect my sources.
Yeah.
I understand, but that's not a legal shield. That's a...
Yes, it is a very legal shield. It's a very legal shield.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Mr. Quintero.
Well, it's obvious that we have some campaigning here at the podium, and while I don't respond to some of these comments, since it is a campaign, I feel obligated to do so. Both Mr. Mohill and Mr. Allen are both working for Bruce Philpott and Bob Yosefian, so I wanted to make sure that that got out so that the public was well aware of what these two advocates are talking about. We do have $444 million in reserves. I never made any comments about CalPERS other than to explain how the funding takes place. I'm very happy that we've bought over 500 acres of open space, and if there's more open space available, I'm willing to buy. That, to me, is priceless. It'll never be built on. It'll be open space for all of the city of Glendale to use. So I'm very happy that we have a city council that's headed in that direction. And then in terms of transparency and Mr. Allen, oh my God, I mean, I've got a list here that is quite long, starting with the financial accounting of his nonprofit. We've never really had any. I'd also like to know whatever happened to the money that he raised for the Thompsons. He set up a fund for the Thompsons to raise money, and I don't know, a few $100s. That's about it. And then finally, my real question is why Mr. Allen throughout the years has used so many aliases. Barry Allen is not truly his name. He's had a number of aliases that he's used throughout the years in the different locations where he's lived. He never gave us an answer. That's been brought up in the past, but we never really got a solid answer. Something about working in media, but anyway, it's just a bit unusual. But look, folks, you really shouldn't use that podium for campaigning. You know, that's what we do outside of the city hall. When you come here, you should be talking about city issues. You should be talking about issues that pertain to city government, not political campaigns. So I suggest you walk your precincts and do your blog and all the rest of the things that you do, but you really shouldn't be talking about politics at the podium. That's the way I see it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Quintero. For myself, I wanted to see if we could get an answer for Mr. Hill. He's been waiting patiently. The reference is to last evening's Traffic and Parking Commission meeting, and I attended that part of that meeting and did hear I think the concern, Mr. Zern and other staff, is that the 75% threshold signatures to trigger preferential parking, in this case, is counted by the number of residents, not residences, but residents living there, versus the total number of homes or residences that are there. And his comment, if I'm understanding him correctly, is that it should be the property owners rather than the people who are happen to be living on the street, whether they're homeowners or tenants. And in this particular set of circumstances, it also seemed that there was at least one property where there hadn't been a resident living there for some 6 months, I guess, at least, according to the the letter carrier. My understanding of that, and we have a TPC commissioner in the audience, is that the reason it is residents rather than homeowners, property owners, has to do with because it's a matter of impact to the people who are living there, and that is the reason, as far as I know. But we had some very interesting math going on up there, or up here, I should say, last night, where we had a TPC commissioner reconfiguring the math as, no, it's not less than 75%, it's 94%, because he was using a different slide rule that included homes, not counting homes where people weren't in residence. So I don't know if Mr. Weissman would like to come up and explain, or if the city attorney would like to take a crack at this, or perhaps Mr. Najarian, who used to sit on the Traffic and Parking Commission.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I know some of what occurred last night in discussing it with staff, and from what I understand, the issue really relates to the interpretation of the section of the code, and it more than likely needs a code change to clarify it. And again, it would be council policy to determine. There were a couple of issues that came up, the threshold 75%, and whether that, because of a vacancy, for example, or the fact that no one was residing in a particular, I believe it's a rear unit, dropped that threshold below 75% at the time the matter was heard, and the code has been interpreted, at least up until this point in time, that you have to maintain that 75% threshold at the meeting, at the time of the meeting when the preferential parking permit may be granted. Certainly the council can change that. So there could be some clarification that's necessary, but I know staff has been following certain rules for implementing those sections for some period of time. Mr. Zern may be able to elaborate on that a little bit more.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Howard's correct. We just need to take a look at that. What the driving force has always been, just as you said, is the immediate impact to those there. A lot of times you have landlords who don't live in the area, don't even live in the city sometimes. So the idea being getting the feedback from the person who actually has to live there day in and day out. However, in the case where you have vacancies and how we count them and whether or not the owner in that case should be then the default vote, those are all things we need to go back and take a look at.
Right. Can I suggest that we do bring that back?
Absolutely.
Because it was not clear to the residents. And another issue that came up, by the way, it was tangential, but I think it relates to something that we've been talking about here, Mr. Hagani, has to do with parking. That issue came up, and how in the multifamily structures there, we had, and it related to the parking, obviously, and the impact of parking, which is what this whole discussion was about, was that we have property owners, landlords, who are renting out parking spaces either to their tenants if they're willing to pony up extra money, or to other individuals. And so there we go again, a perfect example. One of the reasons why we've asked this issue to come back. The commercial component is another one. That's obvious. The issue of basically empty garages, private garages on Brand Boulevard, for example, that are commercial garages. We've required this parking to be provided, but then their tenants are parking all over the neighborhood. The other component, as you know, is this very issue. Yep, we'll rent you our 2-bedroom, 1-bath, but if you want the parking, it's $16.50 a month, and if you don't, it's $13.50 a month. And the impact falls to the neighborhood. And that's just got to stop. But this was another perfect example. It wasn't the primary topic, but it was one of the issues that came out that was causing an even greater impact in an area of Burchett where parking is impacted. And anyway, so let's bring back a clarification on this. If the language is not being, and the chambers were quite full, by the way, with residents. If our TPC members, our commissioners, are having trouble understanding that. And if the public is having trouble understanding that, obviously there's some kind of communication problem. So let's bring that back. And that was it for me.
Move to adjourn if there's nothing further.
Second.
All right, we have a motion second. We're adjourned.